Hey guys, tonight we're heading somewhere hot, sticky and drenched in luxury, Alexandria around 51 BCE. And I'm just going to say this right up front. You probably won't survive this. Not the snakes, not the Roman politics, not even Cleopatra herself, but it'll be fun while it lasts. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. It helps more than you know. And hey, where are you tuning in from? And what time is it over there? Drop your city and the hour in the comments. I always love seeing how far we reach. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey us together. You're standing in the entry hall of the palace in Alexandria, where honeyed resin burns in bronze braziers and perfumed servants move like shadows. This isn't just the capital of Egypt, it's the showroom of an empire. Outside, the Mediterranean glows like molten glass. Inside, the walls are carved with hieroglyphs and scenes of goddess queens who might have looked a lot like the woman we're about to meet, except they didn't have her political instincts or her Roman black book. The scent of frankincense lingers thick in the air. Mixed with something floral, lotus, and something sharper you can't name, you follow the sound of a distant harp, your sandals tapping against marble, and there she is, Cleopatra VII. Philippia, 19 years old, draped in translucent linen, bronze bangles stacked up her arms, eyes darkened with crushed coal. You've heard of her before, obviously. Who hasn't? But in person, she's less a statue, more storm. You get why entire armies are going to tear each other apart over this woman. Not just because of the way she moves, which is calculated but not stiff. And not just the voice, low and deliberate, like someone who never raises it unless she wants everyone to stop breathing. No, it's the way she watches, like she's doing geometry behind those eyes, measuring the weight of your loyalty against the risk of keeping you alive. She greets you without standing, with a small curl of the mouth that might be amusement, or the beginning of a threat. You have to remind yourself this is a woman raised in a dynasty where murder is more common than marriage, where siblings poison each other over breakfast, and where the only real law is survival, and she's good at it. Alexandria is already in chaos. Her father, Ptolemy XII, just died and left her a kingdom crawling with bribes, betrayals, and tax collectors. Her brother husband, yes, you heard that right, and no, it never gets less weird, Ptolemy XIII is supposed to be her co-ruler, but the kid's 13 and has adult advisors whispering about getting rid of her. You're here right at the edge of the storm. Civil war is coming. Rome is circling like a shark. And Cleopatra? She's sitting there peeling a fig, deciding whether to seduce a god, poison a general, or start a war. Maybe all three. Here's the historical fact for you. Alexandria at this time is the cultural capital of the Mediterranean. The Library of Alexandria still exists for now. The city is a melting pot of Greek, Egyptian, Persian, and Roman influence, and Cleopatra is one of the few rulers left who can still read the ancient hieroglyphs. She speaks at least 7 languages, possibly 9. She's no puppet queen. But here's the fringe fact. Rumours already swirl that she practices sex magic, rituals tied to Isis worship designed to enhance her power through erotic rites. There's zero hard proof for this, but it won't stop later writers from salivating over the idea. From the moment she takes the throne, she's more myth than monarch. What's debated, though, is whether she already knows how to play Rome, or if she's still learning. Some scholars argue she was calculating from day one, weaponizing her sexuality like a dagger under silk. Others believe the legend overshadows a woman just trying to hold her kingdom together with whatever tools she has, including a razor-sharp brain and devastating charm. Tonight you're going to see both sides. For now, she invites you to sit beside her. You notice how even that gesture, beckoning you closer, is designed to establish dominance. You're not sitting with her, you're sitting below her, shoulder turned just enough so she can speak without fully facing you. She's in control of every angle. You're aware of your heartbeat. It's a little embarrassing. She hasn't even said anything seductive yet. That's part of the secret, by the way. Seduction for Cleopatra isn't about sex. It's about attention. It's about making you want to be seen by her. It's about knowing that she knows exactly what you want, and then deciding whether you deserve it. She says she's expecting visitors soon. Romans. Powerful ones. And she wants you to see something before they arrive. You follow her out to a private balcony overlooking the harbour. Moonlight makes everything shimmer. In the distance, ships glide silently between obelisks. She gestures to the darkness like it's a map only she can read. "This is my empire," she says quietly, "but it won't be mine for long unless I make it irresistible." And just like that, you get it. The game she's playing isn't about thrones or taxes or treaties. It's about seduction as survival, not just of a queen, but of an entire kingdom. Her beauty, it's a tool. Her intelligence, a weapon. Her relationships, never simple, always strategic. Because if you're Cleopatra, you don't get to rule by force, you rule by fascination. And tonight, the world is about to fall under her spell. So here's the thing they don't tell you in school. Cleopatra doesn't start out with a throne. She earns it. Scratch that. She bleeds for it. Before she becomes the world's most infamous seductress, she's just a teenage girl born into one of the most dysfunctional royal families in history. You think your siblings are toxic? Try being a Ptolemy. Every one of them is either poisoning, marrying, or beheading the others. Usually some combo of the three. If you make it to your 20s without a dagger in your back, they throw you a party. You're about 12 years old, hiding behind a column in the palace gardens, watching a young Cleopatra read aloud from a scroll in Greek. She's got that forehead crinkle thing going on, the one she does when she's memorizing, and she's reciting ancient plays while simultaneously translating them into Egyptian, just for fun. Around her there's a rotating cast of tutors, each specializing in different languages, sciences, and philosophies. One of them tries to correct her pronunciation. She shuts him down so fast the guy actually blushes. She's not the most beautiful in the room. Not yet. Her nose is a bit sharp. Her chin's got defiance carved right into it, but there's something about the way she holds herself, like she already knows that the throne will be hers, and the rest of the world just needs to catch up. Here's your historical fact. Cleopatra wasn't ethnically Egyptian. She came from the Ptolemaic dynasty, a Macedonian Greek family that took over Egypt after Alexander the Great's death. But unlike her royal ancestors, who mostly ignored the native culture and ruled like awkward foreign tourists, Cleopatra embraced it. She was the first of her line to speak Egyptian fluently, and people noticed. It was radical, even subversive. She had other talents too, singing, philosophy, rhetoric. She could argue circles around grown men in the palace court, and she did often. Most men underestimated her. They wouldn't make that mistake twice. But here's your fringe fact. There are whispers, even in her adolescence, that she carries old blood. A claim that she's part divine, through some mysterious maternal lineage that connects her to Isis herself. It's never proven, obviously, but Cleopatra leans into the myth. She's always playing with symbols. Feathers, serpents, sacred colours. The line between human and goddess is blurry by design. It's not narcissism, it's branding. At 15, she gets her first taste of real power when her father, Ptolemy XII, known as Auletes, or the flute player, mostly because he was better at music than governing, flees Egypt in a cloud of political chaos. He leaves Cleopatra and her older sister Berenice behind. The sister seizes power. Cleopatra watches from the sidelines as Berenice throws lavish parties, coins new currency with her own face on it, and rules like a drunk empress. It doesn't last. Daddy comes back with Roman muscle behind him and has Berenice executed on the palace steps. You're there, off to the side, watching Cleopatra watch it all. No tears, no flinching. Just calculation. The girl learns fast. Family is a liability, and power always has a price. 2 years later, she's co-ruler with her kid brother, Ptolemy XVII. He's maybe 13, soft, spoiled, surrounded by advisors who treat Cleopatra like she's the decorative centerpiece on a royal table. Beautiful, silent, and easily removed. Yeah, they're wrong. What follows is straight out of a reality show. Cleopatra starts appearing alone on currency. Alone in royal proclamations, alone at religious ceremonies. It's subtle at first, but she's clearly edging her brother off stage. Rome, of course, is watching. And here's the open scholarly debate. Was Cleopatra already setting the stage for a Roman alliance before the war with her brother broke out? Some believe she had early contacts, letters, envoys, maybe even flirtations, well before Caesar arrived on the Egyptian shores. Others argue she was still reactive, not proactive, a teenager trying to survive, not mastermind an empire. The truth is probably somewhere in between, but the tension in Alexandria is rising like steam. You can feel it. Whispers in the palace corridors, scrolls passed in secret, spies everywhere. By 17, Cleopatra is outmaneuvered, exiled to the desert, and stripped of her titles. Now picture this. You're riding alongside her in a creaky chariot under a brutal sun, sand caking your lips, the city behind you shrinking into a blur of heat haze. She doesn't cry, doesn't even blink, just sits there in royal silence, plotting. And this is where most people would give up, fade into history as another footnote queen. Not Cleopatra. She disappears into the borderlands, gathers support, and prepares for the comeback of the century. Because Rome's knocking on Egypt's door, and a certain general named Julius Caesar is about to land in Alexandria, sword out, libido fully operational. But for now, Cleopatra's just sharpening her edge, learning how to smile while setting a trap, figuring out how to make someone fall in love without saying a word. You're there in the tent with her, late at night, maps spread across the floor, candles flickering. She traces the path of Caesar's fleet with a fingertip, and then she looks at you, eyes gleaming, and says something you'll never forget. I don't need an army, I need an invitation. And you realize seduction isn't about sex, not yet. It's about being seen, remembered, wanted. Power isn't something she takes. It's something you give her, willingly, without even realizing it. You're back in Alexandria, but the mood's different now, thick with tension, like the moment before a monsoon breaks. The palace corridors are quieter, emptier. The torches don't seem to burn as bright. You catch glimpses of Cleopatra only at odd hours, always in motion, always surrounded by whispering advisors, hands full of scrolls or maps or letters sealed with wax. She barely sleeps, her eyeliner's smudged. She looks like someone working on the sharp edge of panic and purpose. Her father Aletys is gone, dead. 1 minute he's stumbling around with his flute, trying to stay on Rome's good side, the next he's passed the throne to his teenage daughter and younger son in a clumsy will that basically reads like a bad group project assignment. Share Egypt, don't kill each other. Spoiler, they will definitely try to kill each other. Here's your historical fact. After Ptolemy XII's death in 51 BCE, Cleopatra and her brother husband Ptolemy XIII become joint rulers, as per Egyptian tradition. She's about 18, he's 10, which means he's really not running anything, not at first. But his advisors? Oh, they're scheming the moment the ink on that will dries. Especially a guy named Pothinus, a eunuch and bureaucrat who smells weakness like a bloodhound. He wants a puppet king. Cleopatra, with her growing confidence, language skills, and solo appearances on official documents, is a serious problem. But here's the fringe fact. Cleopatra starts doing something unusual for a woman in her position, especially one facing political exile. She inserts herself directly into temple rituals meant for living gods. She's not just aligning with Isis. She's starting to become her in the public eye. At festivals, she appears not as co-ruler, but as divine incarnation. The people notice, the priests notice, Rome notices, and Rome's interest in Egypt is not new. Egypt is the breadbasket of the Mediterranean. Grain, papyrus, gold, and enough wealth to make even the senatorial class drool, and now it's unstable. Perfect. Here's the open scholarly debate. Was Rome actively pushing Ptolemy XIII's side of the conflict to weaken Cleopatra's claim and secure easier access to Egypt's riches? Some historians argue that factions in Rome were already in contact with Pothinus, possibly encouraging the move to oust her. Others think Cleopatra's own ambition, her refusal to act as a silent figurehead, is what forced the confrontation. Either way, what follows is as messy as it is inevitable. You walk the streets of Alexandria at twilight, and you see her face painted on temple walls, stamped onto coins, lit by candlelight in the public squares. But you also see them getting defaced. Graffiti scratched through her name, crowds whispering heresy, royal guards growing twitchy. And then it happens, fast and brutal. Cleopatra is stripped of power by a formal decree. She barely has time to grab her servants before she's chased from the palace. No official war, no blood yet, just a sudden, silent coup. She heads for the Theban border, into the dry, cracked wilderness with nothing but a handful of loyal soldiers, some hastily gathered allies, and a head full of strategy. You travel with her through deserts that feel like scorched bone over dunes that shimmer with heat mirages. This isn't the queen on a golden barge, this is a barefoot woman walking on blistered sand, hair tied back, barking orders at mercenaries. And she's not giving up. You're camped beneath a tapestry of stars when she unrolls a letter from a Roman envoy. The handwriting is sharp, impatient. Julius Caesar has landed in Alexandria. He's not here for her. He's chasing down the remnants of Pompey's army. Civil war in Rome has spilled across the sea and Egypt is the unlucky beach it's crashing onto. But Cleopatra reads the letter differently. She sees opportunity. Caesar doesn't care who rules Egypt, she murmurs, eyes scanning the parchment. He cares about order, gold, grip, and survival. You raise an eyebrow. And? She smiles. I can offer him all three. That's when you see it. The real seduction plan forming. Not with lipstick, lace, but with timing, positioning, and a sense of theatre that would make a Hollywood director weep. Cleopatra doesn't just want Caesar's attention, she wants his respect. His awe. She knows Rome is fractured, Caesar's power still uncertain, and if she can lock him down, Egypt becomes more than a client state, it becomes essential. But first, she has to get back into the city, through enemy lines, past guards, right into the heart of a palace that would sooner feed her to the crocodiles than let her back in. You sit beside her that night, fire crackling low, and she asks you a quiet question. Do you know what people fear most? You think for a moment. Losing power? No, she says, gaze distant. They fear desire, because when you want something, someone that badly, you'll do anything for it. Even betray your own gods. You get chills, and the next day she makes her move. The palace is crawling with Ptolemy's men. Roman troops are stationed at the harbour, technically guests of the boy king. Cleopatra can't just walk in, so she doesn't. Instead, she gets rolled up in a rug, or a linen sack, or maybe it's a bedsheet. The historical records disagree, but the effect is the same. Smuggled by her servant Apollodorus through the palace gates, Cleopatra is hand-delivered like an exotic gift to Julius Caesar's private chambers, and the moment she unfurls herself onto his marble floor, history changes forever. But we'll get to that. Right now, you're back at camp, looking out over the sand. Somewhere beyond that horizon, Alexandria waits, the palace, the throne, the man who could make or break an empire. And Cleopatra, she's ready to gamble it all. The linen is soft but scratchy against your skin. You're curled in a tight knot, knees pressed to your chest. The smell of old cloth and desert dust closing in around you. Outside you hear footsteps echoing off marble. A quick exchange in Greek. Tense, clipped, then chance, and then a lift. The world tilts. You're being carried. The bundle sways with each step, jerking slightly with uneven footing, and you try not to breathe too loud. Not that anyone would believe it. Queen Cleopatra smuggled into her own palace like a roll of laundry. But this isn't a stunt. This is strategy. Here's your historical fact. This moment, Cleopatra being delivered to Julius Caesar inside a carpet or sack, really happened, or at least ancient sources like Plutarch say it did. It's one of those stories that straddles the line between history and myth, retold so many times it feels scripted, and yet the simplicity of it is exactly what makes it genius. She could have arrived with banners, servants, pomp, but that would have made her a threat, a spectacle. Instead, she comes as a surprise, a mystery, a wrapped gift for the most powerful man in Rome. You hear a grunt as your carrier shifts weight. Then a knock. A door creaks open and voices murmur beyond the fabric. Then, thud, you're on the floor. There's a pause. Then the bundle is unrolled, light floods your face. You blink. Across the room stands Julius Caesar. He's older than you expected, stooped just slightly, eyes sharp but tired. He's not in armour, just a loose Roman tunic and a look that says he's already seen too much today. The rumours are true. Pompey the Great, his rival in Rome's brutal civil war, had fled to Egypt and been murdered upon arrival, supposedly to impress Caesar. It didn't. Instead, he's furious, mourning, and already tangled in Egypt's chaos. And now here's Cleopatra rising from the folds of fabric like some reborn goddess of silk and sass. She doesn't speak right away, doesn't need to. She simply stands, tall and impossibly composed as if she's been invited rather than smuggled. Her linen dress clings in all the right places, her hair's braided with gold thread, and her eyeliner wings out like a hawk in mid-flight. And the look she gives Caesar? It's not flirtatious. It's evaluative. Are you useful? Are you clever enough to see what I'm offering you? Caesar stares back, then, just the edge of a smile. She's passed the first test. This is where the seduction begins, but not with a kiss, with a conversation. Cleopatra doesn't giggle, she doesn't flatter. She talks politics, Grain supply, Nile flooding, Roman trade interests. She references laws by memory, quotes Roman poets. She even corrects Caesar on a Greek term gently, as if she's handing him a favour instead of a fact check. You're watching a woman not trying to win him, but trying to hook him, challenge him, make herself unforgettable. Here's the fringe fact. Some historians claim she didn't just charm Caesar with beauty or brains, but with performance, literal stagecraft. There are accounts suggesting she trained in dramatic arts, yes, but acting as part of her education, which means everything from her timing to her tone to her costume may have been curated for maximum impact. Imagine weaponizing Shakespeare-level delivery in real time to seduce a general. Cleopatra might have invented that playbook. What Caesar sees is not a damsel in distress. He sees a woman who lost her crown, clawed her way back to the gates, and dared to present herself directly to a Roman consul with nothing but a plan. That night, they talk until the candles burn low. You're half asleep on a velvet couch nearby, pretending not to listen. But you catch snippets about succession laws, about Ptolemy XIII's advisors, about how Cleopatra could stabilize Egypt in days if Rome just gave her the backing. Eventually there's wine, laughter, and finally in the hush of midnight he leans forward and says, "If I restore your throne, what do I get in return?" And she smiles, just slightly. "Everything you want," she says, "and more than you expect." Now here's the open scholarly debate. Was their relationship love, lust, or pure political theatre? Some believe Cleopatra truly admired Caesar. His intellect, his ambition, the way he bent Rome to his will. Others argue she saw him as a means to an end. But either way, what happens next isn't subtle. Caesar decides to support her claim to the throne. War is coming. The next morning the palace is buzzing. Rumours spread like fire through olive groves. Caesar and Cleopatra, together? Ptolemy XIII's camp is in panic. Advisors shout, guards are doubled, the boy king is dragged into court in tears. Meanwhile, Cleopatra strolls through the palace in a fresh white gown like she never left. You're standing beside her as Caesar makes the announcement. The will of the late Ptolemy XII will be honoured. Cleopatra and her brother will rule together, but under Rome's supervision, a not-so-subtle Roman leash. Outside, the streets erupt into chaos. Loyalists to Ptolemy riot. They see Caesar as an invader, Cleopatra as a Roman puppet. The palace is barricaded. Fires light up the harbour. For 10 days, Alexandria becomes a war zone. Caesar, never one to retreat, stations his men in the palace and prepares for battle. And through it all, Cleopatra stays close. Not just in his bed, though yes, that happens, but in strategy sessions, in war councils, on rooftops overlooking the city. She's not arm candy, she's a co-conspirator. At night, you walk the halls and hear laughter echoing from Caesar's private chamber. Not just pleasure, but genuine amusement. She's challenging him, teasing him, pulling his thoughts away from Rome's civil war and into the depths of Egypt's mysteries. And he likes it. But Cleopatra knows this isn't a love story. It's a transaction. And she intends to get everything she's owed. Because seduction to her has always been a layered thing. It's not just bodies and glances. It's trust, timing, and tension. It's making someone believe you're the answer to every question they didn't know they were asking. And Caesar? He's already under the spell. The city burns in pockets. Columns of black smoke are rising behind the skyline of Alexandria, like funeral pyres for the old order. But inside the palace, you're watching something even more dangerous flicker to life. A Roman general and an Egyptian queen, plotting the future over figs and maps. By now, Cleopatra has moved into Caesar's quarters. There's no point in hiding it. The scandal is the point. She knows how the world works. If she slinks in quietly, they'll say she's just another mistress. But if she walks in through the front gate, shoulders back, crown straight, wearing the scent of saffron and victory, they'll say she's a queen, and she'll be right either way. You're sitting at the edge of a makeshift war room. Caesar's men hunched over blueprints of the palace compound, speaking in a Latin so fast you barely catch a word. Cleopatra listens without interrupting, just watching, calculating. Then, without ceremony, she walks over, adjusts the position of a Roman cohort marker on the table, and says, "You'll want them closer to the eastern gate. The loyalists will come from there." The Romans pause, glance at Caesar. He just nods, like this is completely normal. Foreign queens redesigning his battlefield. And that's the shift. It's subtle, but you feel it. Cleopatra isn't just a lover now, she's part of the strategy, part of the command. Here's your historical fact. The siege of Alexandria, 48 BCE, lasted several months and nearly cost Caesar his life. He and his forces were holed up inside the palace, surrounded by Egyptian loyalists supporting Ptolemy XIII. And though he was technically in a neutral city, Caesar found himself the focus of a brutal and bloody standoff, with Cleopatra right beside him. But here's the fringe detail, the part they don't always teach you. During the siege, Cleopatra may have helped plan palace defences personally. Some fringe accounts suggest she used knowledge of secret passageways, palace cisterns, and even trap rooms. Yes, trap rooms, to help Caesar hold the line. Whether or not that's true, what's undeniable is that she didn't run. While fire bloomed in the streets and catapults shook the marble floors, she stayed. And Ptolemy? Well, he wasn't exactly rallying the troops himself. The boy king was mostly being shuffled around by his advisors like a sacred cow on a leash. In public, he wept dramatically and begged for peace. In private, he greenlit more bloodshed. It was theatre, bad theatre, and Cleopatra was beating him at his own show. So here's where the open scholarly debate kicks in. Some historians argue that Cleopatra used the siege as more than just a survival tactic, that she deliberately staged her loyalty to Caesar in such a visible, risky way because she knew what it would cost her brother politically. The worse the city got, the more desperate Ptolemy looked. Meanwhile, Cleopatra stood unshaken. Royal, resilient, Roman-approved. There's one night you remember most. The walls are shaking from a nearby blast. Someone's finally breached the outer garden wall. And Caesar is deep in conversation with his generals. Cleopatra steps outside barefoot, walking through the cracked marble corridor. The air smells like burning linen. She looks over her shoulder and says softly, "A fire will always reveal who wants to rebuild and who only wanted to play king." She's right, of course. The city's turning against Ptolemy. People are starving, trade is frozen, the harbour is blocked. And while some blame Caesar, more and more begin to question the boy king's fitness to rule. Cleopatra isn't just seizing power, she's reshaping public opinion. It's a slow psychological conquest, and it starts to work. Rome finally sends reinforcements. The tide turns. Ptolemy flees during a skirmish on the Nile and, well, he doesn't exactly die like a hero. His boat capsizes, he drowns, and for a brief, uncomfortable moment, Egypt doesn't have a clear ruler, just smoke and rumours. Cleopatra acts fast. In a scene that feels almost too cinematic to be real, she emerges from the palace wearing a golden breastplate and a ceremonial wig, flanked by Egyptian priests and Roman soldiers alike. She doesn't declare war, she declares stability. Her message is clear, the chaos is over, Egypt is back, and she's in charge. Well, almost. There's still the pesky matter of Egyptian tradition. Cleopatra can't rule alone, not officially, so she installs another younger brother, Ptolemy XIV, as co-ruler. He's a child, basically, quiet, easily controlled, which is the point. It gives her political cover while making it clear who's really sitting on the throne. Oh, and did we mention she's pregnant? Yep. Let's not pretend it was a long, drawn-out courtship. Caesar's been busy, and now Cleopatra is carrying his child, a boy she will name Caesarion, meaning Little Caesar. It's less subtle than she usually goes for, but the message is sharp. Her dynasty now carries Roman blood. Here's the twist. Caesar doesn't reject her. He doesn't deny the child. In fact, when the fighting ends, he stays in Egypt for months. It drives his enemies in Rome absolutely insane. While they're struggling to keep the Republic from collapsing, Julius Caesar is lounging in Alexandria, sailing up the Nile with a queen who bathes in rose petals and orders her breakfast in 5 languages. You're on that boat too. Drifting down the wide, lazy river, you watch Caesar and Cleopatra play dice games, argue about astronomy and make love like they've got no empire waiting back home. The people come to the riverbanks to see her. Some throw flowers, others just bow. Cleopatra waves like a goddess on earth. Caesar looks dazed half the time. Spellbound. You get the feeling this isn't just lust, it's legacy. But she's never not working. In private, Cleopatra talks about taxes, military reforms, temple politics. She's turning Egypt into something new, still ancient in style, but modern in reach. Rome is in her bed, but Egypt is in her bones. Every move is double-edged. Every touch carries the scent of diplomacy. And you? You start to wonder if maybe this isn't just the story of a seductress worming her way into Caesar's heart. Maybe it's the story of a queen who knew exactly how to take a broken empire, a foreign lover, a dying dynasty, and spin them into a war. Because Cleopatra's not playing chess anymore, she is the board. The palace is quieter now, Alexandria has stopped burning, the riots have faded to distant memory, and the air smells more like salt and myrrh than smoke and blood. You stroll through the halls with bare feet on cool marble, past servants carrying fruit trays and scrolls, past stone lions that guard every doorway like they remember the war, and somewhere, echoing through the tall vaulted chambers, is Cleopatra's laughter. She's glowing, not metaphorically actually. Her skin is burnished from Nile sun, her belly softly rounded with pregnancy, and her jewellery somehow manages to hum against her like it's part of her bloodstream. And Caesar? Still here, still tangled in silk sheets and political gossip slipping between strategy meetings, and Cleopatra's bedroom like it's all the same conversation. You thought maybe the spell would fade, that he'd remember Rome, remember duty, but no, he lingers, and Cleopatra uses every second of it. Here's your historical fact. Julius Caesar remained in Egypt with Cleopatra for about 9 months after the siege of Alexandria ended. That's not just a fling, that's practically a royal sabbatical. He sails with her, he debates theology with her, he likely helps her stabilise grain exports and rework key elements of governance. And while Roman historians would love to frame this as a love-drunk lapse in judgment, Cleopatra's version is much more calculated. Because even as she carries his child, she's laying foundations, rebuilding her court, rewarding loyalty, silencing those who sided with her late brother. The archives are busy, the temples are bustling. Her face appears on coins again, alone, not with her brother husband, not with any Roman, just her, crowned, poised, looking straight ahead. But here's the fringe fact. Some ancient astrologers claim Caesar and Cleopatra spent time charting the stars together, drawing up horoscopes for their unborn child. Whether that's true or just a poetic flourish, Cleopatra absolutely leaned into cosmic symbolism. She presents herself not only as Isis reborn, but as the mother of a divine lineage, and her son with Caesar. That's no accident. He's a symbol, a living merger of East and West, her very own god prince, and Caesar seems content, or at least intrigued. He has the most powerful woman in the Eastern Mediterranean warming his bed and backing his interests. Egypt is now essentially pacified, grateful or forced, to cooperate. But his senators back in Rome, they're not loving any of this. Caesar was supposed to return to stabilise the Republic, not shack up with a foreign queen and father a child who might claim power one day. Rome is a jealous mistress, and she hates sharing. You lie beside Cleopatra on some balcony one night, both of you gazing up at the stars. Her hand rests lightly on her stomach. "He'll have my eyes," she says, not asking, just knowing, but Caesar's ambition. You raise an eyebrow. "That's a dangerous mix," she smiles without teeth. "The world isn't changed by safety." And then she tells you something strange, that she dreams in omens, that she's seen visions, golden serpents, oceans dyed red, a throne floating above fire. You laugh, nervously, but she doesn't. "I know what I'm doing," she says softly. "Every step, every word, every smile." And here's the open scholarly debate. Was Cleopatra really in love with Caesar? The ancient writers love to speculate. Plutarch says she loved his strength, his charisma. Dio suggests it was pure political gain. But there's something more complicated here. Cleopatra didn't need to have his child. She didn't need to let him stay. She could have played the game slower, safer, but she didn't. Which means, at the very least, she believed in the myth of what they could be together. Rome and Egypt, East and West, forged not in war, but in bed and bloodline. When Caesar finally decides to return to Rome, he doesn't slink away in the night. He sails out with Cleopatra waving from the palace steps and promises to send for her. Some sources even claim she wanted to go with him immediately, but advisors on both sides warned against it. Too soon, too risky. The optics would be disastrous. Rome wasn't ready for Cleopatra, not yet, so she stays, for now. She gives birth to Caesarion in early 47 BCE. The palace erupts with celebrations, musicians play for 3 days, priests declare the child a demigod. He is wrapped in gold-threaded cloth and laid in a cradle shaped like a papyrus boat. And his mother? She appears on temple walls nursing him like the goddess Isis, radiant and calm, her gaze unblinking. The message is crystal clear. This isn't just a royal heir. This is divine destiny. But not everyone is thrilled. Whispers stir about what the child means. Will Caesar recognize him? Will Rome accept him? Is this child a threat or a pawn? And Cleopatra? She does what she always does. She stays silent and watches the whispers build. Because she knows how rumours work. She knows how to let a story spread until it becomes reality. Rome sends envoys. They bring gifts, awkward congratulations, and veiled questions. Is Caesarion truly Caesar's son? Cleopatra never confirms it directly. She doesn't need to. She invites the messengers to hold the child, lets them see the curve of his nose, the tight set of his jaw. Just enough resemblance to be undeniable. Just enough difference to keep the Senate up at night. You're sitting in the palace garden one afternoon when she joins you, baby in arms, wrapped in green silk. She doesn't speak right away, she just rocks him gently, humming an old Egyptian lullaby. The breeze stirs the reeds, the scent of lotus hangs in the air. Do you think he'll be greater than his father? She asks suddenly. You don't know how to answer. The world barely survived Caesar. What would it do with Caesar reborn? Wearing coal-lined eyes and speaking fluent Egyptian? She kisses her son's forehead and smiles. Then we'll teach him to be smarter. And in that moment you understand, Cleopatra isn't building a future. She's crafting one, sculpting it out of flesh and fable, whispering stories into her child's ears before he can walk. Because seduction isn't just about men, it's about legacy, and hers has only just begun. The heat is thick in the palace courtyard today, the kind that makes the air shimmer and the marble tiles too warm to touch barefoot. You're following Cleopatra through the halls, watching her move with a grace that's no longer girlish. It's lethal. Motherhood hasn't softened her, or, if anything, it's sharpened her. There's an intensity now, a weight behind her glances, like she's looking 10 years into the future with every step. Caesarion is never far. A nursemaid carries him, swaddled in fine linen, while Cleopatra rules, advises, negotiates, and calculates, all with the calm of someone who knows she's playing a long game. Word has come from Rome. Julius Caesar has returned, triumphant, draped in victory and controversy. Cleopatra's name is whispered in Roman forums, in temples, in bedrooms, not just as a mistress, as a threat. She's beautiful, they say, dangerous, a foreign queen with a Roman child. The tension is bubbling. But here's your historical fact. In 46 BCE, Cleopatra does go to Rome, with Caesarion. Not in secret, not under cover of night, but in a very public, very political move. It's her boldest play yet. She doesn't arrive quietly. She arrives like a goddess descending from her temple, dressed in gold-threaded robes, perfumed in lotus and frankincense, sailing up the Tiber in a royal barge. No Egyptian monarch had done this before. Rome had seen generals and senators, kings and conquered princes, but not her. And let's talk about that entrance. You're in the crowd when she arrives. The Romans around you go still, confused, then riveted. The rumours didn't do her justice. Cleopatra doesn't just walk into the city, she commands it. Not by force, by presence. She doesn't bow, she doesn't speak Latin unless she wants to, and yet everyone turns when she passes. Even the marble statues seem to lean a little closer. The Senate? Absolutely losing it. Caesar, for his part, doesn't hide the connection. He houses her in a villa across the Tiber, just far enough from the heart of Rome to maintain plausible deniability, but close enough for frequent consultations. There's a steady stream of visitors, curious senators, influential wives, poets and gossips. Everyone wants a glimpse of the woman who tamed Caesar. And Cleopatra, ever the strategist, plays the part perfectly. She holds court, she educates, she fascinates, she wears Egyptian silks instead of Roman stolas. She invites senators' wives to learn astrology and geometry, subjects most of their husbands barely understand. She's rewriting what power looks like, and Rome doesn't know whether to worship her or crucify her. Now, here's your fringe fact. Cleopatra's statue was placed in the temple of Venus Genetrix, the divine ancestress of Caesar's family line. That's not a small gesture. That's the kind of political branding that says she belongs here. She's part of this sacred mythos now. Her image stands beside the goddess of love and the mother of the Roman people. For a foreign queen, unheard of, but not everyone is seduced. You overhear whispered conversations, tight-lipped Romans sneer about the harlot queen, about how she must be drugging Caesar, enchanting him with exotic charms. Xenophobia and misogyny swirl together into a narrative that's impossible to untangle. Cleopatra is no longer just a woman. They've turned her into a force, a femme fatale, the embodiment of everything they fear. A powerful, intelligent, sexually liberated woman who refuses to apologize. Here's where the scholarly debate kicks in. Was Cleopatra's visit to Rome part of a plan to position Caesarion as Caesar's legitimate heir? Some argue that she never intended that. It was simply to secure Egypt's independence and her political survival. Others think she came with a clear goal, to shape the succession of the Roman world. After all, Caesar had no other acknowledged sons. What better way to unite two empires than through a golden child with royal blood on both sides? And what does Caesar think of all this? You watch him one evening, seated beside Cleopatra under a grapevine-covered pergola. He's laughing, genuinely laughing, which is rare. She's reading him a poem in Greek, translating as she goes, changing words just enough to make it risker. His guards pretend not to hear. He leans toward her, mouth open in mock outrage. But you can tell he likes being shocked by her. He likes being matched. And then one night, everything shifts. A letter arrives. Urgent. Caesar reads it once and sighs deeply. You catch just two words, Brutus and Cassius. The opposition is growing. Rome's foundations are cracking under the weight of Caesar's reforms and his ego. Dictatorship whispers in the streets. There are too many senators who fear what happens if he consolidates power. And adding Cleopatra into the mix, a queen, a child with questionable Roman legitimacy, is the tipping point. The next day she asks you, do they hate me because I'm powerful, or because I don't ask permission? You want to say both, but she already knows. Despite the growing danger, Cleopatra stays. She knows leaving too soon would look like defeat, like an admission of guilt. So she holds her head high, continues her daily processions, and speaks to Caesar in private about future plans. She even hosts dinners, lavish ones, peacocks stuffed with dates, musicians flown in from Alexandria, the best minds of the day drunk and enchanted under oil lamp light. And somewhere in the background the daggers are being sharpened. You hear it in the change of tone, the way servants hesitate before speaking, the way senators stop making eye contact, the chill in the air around Caesar's name. She senses it too. We won't be welcome here much longer, she says one morning, watching the sun rise over the Tiber. The Romans want their empire, but they're not ready to share it. And she's right, because while she has Julius Caesar's heart, maybe even his loyalty, she'll never have Rome's. Not truly. Not yet. But Cleopatra doesn't cry, doesn't rage. She adjusts her bracelets, tightens her crown, and kisses her son on the forehead. Because if Rome won't accept her, she'll make Egypt so powerful they'll never have a choice. You wake to shouting. Somewhere in the villa, early morning, long before the city stirs, there's a panicked exchange between guards. The voices are sharp, urgent, not the kind that mean fire or thieves, the kind that mean something irreversible just happened. Cleopatra is already awake. She doesn't rise in panic or rush to the door. She just sits still, one hand curled around the edge of her silk robe, the other pressed lightly to the bed beside her. Her gaze is distant, already somewhere knowing, already calculating. You realize she probably heard the news in her dreams. Caesar is dead. Here's your historical fact. Julius Caesar was assassinated on the Ides of March 4 BCE, stabbed 23 times by a group of Roman senators, including men he once considered allies. Brutus, Cassius, treachery as old as empire. It wasn't just political murder, it was a performance done in the theatre of the Senate, in full daylight for maximum message. The Republic will not be replaced. A dictator, no matter how beloved or brilliant, must bleed. And Cleopatra, she doesn't scream, doesn't weep. She dresses slowly in deep blue linen and walks out into the Roman morning like nothing's changed, because she knows everything has. There's no protection anymore, no alliance, no sanctuary. Caesar was her lover, yes, but more than that, he was a shield, a Roman sword in her hand, and now that sword lies cooling on the marble floor of the Curia. What follows is taunts. No official invitations to stay, no declarations about Caesarion, nothing. Cleopatra is no longer a guest. She's a problem, a liability, a foreign complication with the wrong kind of claim. She orders the villa packed within hours. Rome doesn't ask her to leave. It doesn't have to. She can only read the stares, the sudden lack of greetings, the way guards no longer bow, the moment power dies. Everyone starts rewriting history in real time. And Cleopatra, she's not waiting for someone to erase her from it. You ride with her back through the countryside, the Tiber receding in the distance, Caesarion asleep in her arms. There's no royal procession this time. No perfumes or poetry, just the sound of horses' hooves and the weight of a woman who's just been cut loose from the greatest empire on earth. But she's not broken. On the ship home, she barely speaks for days. The sea is choppy. Salt clings to everything. The boy cries in the night, and she holds him close, humming the same lullaby in the same low tone. But there's something colder in her now. Not grief, steel. Back in Alexandria, she returns to the throne with a new edge. The softness is gone. So is the indulgence. The games, the honeyed laughs, the slow seductions, shelved for now, because she knows what comes next. Rome is a headyless snake still twitching, and she's sitting in a kingdom that could be swallowed whole if she makes the wrong move. Here's your fringe fact. After Caesar's death, Cleopatra may have begun reaching out quietly to factions in Rome. Letters, diplomatic feelers, testing the waters, who would rise from Caesar's ashes, who would be dangerous, and who would need her help. Some suggest she tried contacting Brutus and Cassius. Others think she was already looking for the next Caesar before the old one's blood had dried. And here's the debate. Was she mourning or manoeuvring? Some ancient sources paint her as heartbroken, devastated by the death of her lover. Others say she quickly turned her attention to survival, brushing off sentiment in favour of strategy. The truth is probably a messy mix. Cleopatra loved deeply, yes, but she also knew the cost of attaching her fate to powerful men. She wasn't just a widow now. She was a political widow, and that's a very specific, very dangerous thing to be. You're there when the palace priests bring her an omen. 2 birds fighting in the garden. One golden, one black. The black one wins. She waves them away. You think I rely on signs? She mutters. I rely on leverage. So she does what she's always done. She builds her own. She elevates Caesarion, begins naming him more frequently in public rituals. He is the son of the god Julius, the heir of both Rome and Egypt. She has statues made, him as Horus, her as Isis, standing not behind him but beside him. She's not grooming him to rule after her, she's grooming him to rule with her. And the people, they buy in, at least enough of them. The myths work, the rituals reinforce it. Her image is everywhere again. On temple walls, on coinage, in the dreams of commoners who whisper about the living goddess, who might be Egypt's salvation in a world gone mad. But there's unrest brewing beyond the Nile. Octavian, Caesar's adopted heir, is gathering support in Rome. Mark Antony, Caesar's general and longtime ally, is playing kingmaker from the east, trying to hold the Republic's limbs together with bribes and bravado. The world is cracking down the middle. And Cleopatra? She's waiting. You sit with her one evening on a stone bench overlooking the harbour. The moonlight turns the water silver. She's dressed in white, no jewellery, hair unbound. It's rare seeing her like this, quiet, still. He was a great man, she says suddenly. No names, she doesn't need to say them. Even great men die, she adds, and the world doesn't wait for their replacements. She's right, of course. Rome is already rewriting Caesar's story, sanitizing the parts that made people uncomfortable. The Senate is trying to put the Republic back together with spit and promises, and the name Cleopatra is already being scrubbed from certain corners. But she's not going anywhere. In fact, she's about to step back into the Roman world, this time not as a guest, not as a lover, but as a queen with something Rome desperately needs: grain, gold, and power. The seduction, you see, was never just about Caesar. That was Act 1. Act 2, that begins with Mark Antony. It starts with an invitation, or maybe it's a summons, depending on who you ask. Either way, Cleopatra receives it while reclining in the palace's cool inner chamber, one hand curled around a pomegranate, the other flipping through a stack of scrolls that smell faintly of resin and conquest. A Roman envoy stands sweating in the doorway, sandals scuffed from travel, lips dry with nerves. Mark Antony requests your presence in Tarsus, he says. Cleopatra doesn't look up immediately. She finishes reading the line she's on, then sets the scroll down like she's placing a chess piece. She arches an eyebrow. Requests, she says, and you feel the air shift. Here's your historical fact. In 41 BCE, Mark Antony, one of the Rome's most powerful men and now part of the post-Caesar ruling triumvirate, called Cleopatra to the city of Tarsus in Asia Minor. Officially, it was to investigate whether she had supported Caesar's assassins. Unofficially, everyone knew this meeting was about politics and desire. But Cleopatra doesn't pack her bags in a rush. She doesn't send back a polite acceptance. No, she prepares, she transforms. You're there for the process, and it's ridiculous in the most regal way. The barge is redesigned entirely, decked in gold, purple sails billowing like a divine omen. Rows of oars shimmer in the sun, their rhythm like the heartbeat of a sod. Cleopatra herself is styled as Aphrodite, goddess of love, reclining beneath a silk canopy while attendants dressed as cupids fan her with peacock feathers. The Nile sparkles, the perfume of roses trails in her wake. Birds follow, fish leap. It's not a journey, it's a religious experience on the water. And Mark Antony, he's not prepared. The man is used to battlefields, not ballets. He's bold, brash, known for drinking contests and the kind of speeches that get statues built. But when Cleopatra arrives in Tarsus, he forgets every word he meant to say. He stares, like everyone does, because she doesn't look like a diplomat. She looks like something summoned from myth. You're there in the palace courtyard when they first meet. Antony steps forward, trying to assert himself, chest out, arms wide, confident grin locked in place. But Cleopatra doesn't flinch. She lets him kiss her hand, then calls him Dionysus, like it's an inside joke they've been sharing for years. And just like that, he's disarmed. Here's your fringe fact. There are rumours that Cleopatra rehearsed this entire moment beforehand, every glance, every phrase, every accessory. She knew Antony fancied himself a descendant of Hercules and a kind of spiritual twin to Dionysus, the god of wine and revelry. So what does Cleopatra do? She becomes Aphrodite. She speaks his mythology back to him in velvet and gold. He doesn't stand a chance. They dine, and then they dine again. You lose count of how many nights pass, how many banquets stretch into dawn. The food is obscene, boar stuffed with figs, flamingo tongues, yes, really, and enough wine to sink a trireme. Musicians play until their fingers bleed. Dancers collapse in satin puddles. But the real entertainment is the conversation. They talk politics first. Always. Egypt's position, Rome's needs, Antony's future ambitions. But between the words you watch them circling each other, flirting not just with bodies but with power. Cleopatra doesn't try to impress him with submissiveness. She teases him, challenges him. He brags, she laughs. He quotes Latin, she responds in flawless Greek, and when he leans too close, she pulls away just enough to make him lean further. It's not just seduction, it's schooling, and Antony loves it. Here's where the scholarly debate flares up. Was Cleopatra manipulating Antony from the start, playing off his ego the way she did with Caesar? Or was this something different? Was there real affection between them? Real mutual seduction? Ancient sources argue both ways. Some claim she wrapped him around her finger from the first sip of wine. Others insist Antony, no stranger to powerful women, met her as an equal. But honestly, watching them together, you start to believe it's both. They're performing for each other, yes, but they're also genuinely entertained. You catch a moment one night after the crowd has thinned and the torches burn low. Antony leans back in his chair, wine-stained smile on his face, and says, "You're dangerous, you know." And Cleopatra, twirling a fig by its stem, replies, "Only to men who think they can't be ruled." You don't know if she's flirting or warning him or both, but it works. The next day Antony follows her back to Alexandria. He leaves behind obligations, Senate whispers, even a Roman wife. Because now, like Caesar before him, he wants to see what it's like to live in her world, on her terms, and what a world it is. Back in Egypt, the parties continue, but they're not frivolous. Their policy wrapped in pleasure. Cleopatra and Antony form a private club, the inimitable livers, a kind of elite society devoted to excess, philosophy, and unconventional governance. Yes, there's drinking and jokes and parades, but there are also state discussions and reforms happening in the shadows. Cleopatra is weaving her influence into every Roman breath Antony takes. She gives him ships, supplies, soldiers. In return, he recognizes Caesarion publicly, strengthening her son's claim and poking a very sharp stick into Octavian's political ribs. And this is Cleopatra's true genius, Because seduction isn't about getting what you want right now. It's about planting ideas so deep in someone's mind that they think they wanted it first. She makes Antony believe it's his idea to stay, his idea to support Egypt, his idea to create a future where Rome and Alexandria share a throne. And Antony, drunk on love or power or both, begins to dream it too. But you know how Rome works, how it hates being second to anything, how it never forgets betrayal or ambition. This isn't just an affair, it's the declaration. Cleopatra and Antony aren't lovers, they're a revolution. Rome is fuming. You can feel it even from across the sea, like thunder grumbling under a distant sky. The letters arrive in Alexandria stained with wax and venom, accusations, insults, warnings wrapped in formal titles. They say Antony has lost his Roman virtues, that he's been bewitched, that he's a prisoner in silks, a general turned gigolo under Cleopatra's spell. The kind of gossip that makes senators spit wine across banquet tables. And Cleopatra, she laughs. Not a mocking laugh, more like the kind you give when someone's too foolish to see what's in front of them. She knows how this game works. Rome will always look for a woman to blame. It's easier to say a queen bewitched a man than admit a Roman willingly turned his back on the Republic. But here's your historical fact. By 40 BCE, Antony's relationship with Cleopatra is no longer a whispered affair. It's a political reality. He's living in Alexandria, fathering children with her, twins in fact, and helping her secure Egypt's borders and economy with Roman backing. In turn, she provides him with the kind of resources Rome can't easily offer. Grain for the armies, ships for his naval ambitions, and a base of power in the east strong enough to rival his enemies back home. Oh, and there's a slight complication. Antony is married to a Roman woman named Fulvia. She's not the type to take betrayal lightly. Fulvia actually raises an army against Octavian, yes, Caesar's heir, while Antony's off playing house with Cleopatra. The result? Civil war brews again, and Antony is summoned back to Rome to fix the mess. Cleopatra watches him go without tears, without speeches, just a single phrase, make them kneel. You're with her the day he sails. She's dressed in gold and turquoise, fingers looped through Caesarion's hair. She doesn't wave, she doesn't flinch, she just stares out at the horizon. And you wonder, how many men has she watched vanish into the sea with promises in their mouths? But here's the fringe fact. While Antony is in Rome, Cleopatra doesn't just wait around. She rules, fully. She builds temples, institutes new taxes, makes diplomatic overtures to smaller eastern kingdoms. Some say she even dabbled in alchemy, an early interest in Mercury and transformation rituals. Maybe it's myth, or maybe it's just more propaganda from Romans who couldn't stand the idea of a queen being smarter and more curious than their scribes. And here's where the scholarly debate begins to shimmer like a mirage. Did Cleopatra truly believe Antony would come back? Or was she already planning for either outcome, his return or his betrayal? Some argue she was emotionally invested, even in love. Others insist she was simply securing her position, hedging every bet with elegance. Either way, he does return, not right away. First, he marries Octavia, Octavian's sister, as a way to smooth over the political fallout. It's a performance, a gesture of Roman unity, but it doesn't last. By 37 BCE, he sails back to the east, back to Egypt, and back to Cleopatra, this time for good. You'd think she'd gloat, but when he walks into the palace again, all sunburnt and Roman and awkwardly sheepish, she just raises one eyebrow and says, "Dinner's at sunset. Wear something decent." And just like that, they pick up where they left off. Except now, they're not just lovers, they're partners in an open, dangerous game. Antony needs money, troops, and Eastern loyalty for his next military campaign. Cleopatra provides all three. In exchange, she gets official recognition of her children. Yes, plural now. The twins, Alexander Helios and Cleopatra Selene. Plus Caesarion, who she continues to steer as King of Kings. What does that mean exactly? Well, let's talk about the donations of Alexandria. Here's the bombshell. In 34 BCE, after a series of military successes in Armenia, Antony and Cleopatra throw a public ceremony in Alexandria that basically declares the future of the known world. You're there, standing in a sea of onlookers as Antony, in Roman armour dipped in gold, announces a new distribution of power. Cleopatra is declared Queen of Kings. Caesarion is officially named son of the divine Julius, and co-ruler with her. Their children. Each gets a kingdom, Cyprus, Armenia, Media, Syria. It's like Oprah with a crown. You get a throne. You get a throne. Everyone gets a throne, and the crowd goes wild. It's the most audacious theatrical act of political seduction Cleopatra's ever pulled. Not toward a man, but toward a nation. She's not just seducing Antony now, she's seducing Egypt, making them believe in her dynasty, in a future that doesn't include Rome's boot on their necks. But Rome is not clapping. Here's the fallout. Octavian gets the reports and goes absolutely feral. He leaks the details to the Roman public, spinning it as proof that Antony has gone mad under Cleopatra's influence. That he's handing over Roman territory to children, to a foreign queen, to the son of Julius Caesar, who might be a legitimate threat to Octavian's claim. You've never seen a smear campaign like this. Octavian starts printing coins with inscriptions warning of Cleopatra's power. Pamphlets circulate describing her as a sorceress. Stories emerge of her bathing in crushed pearls, seducing Antony with exotic potions, speaking to serpents. It's lurid, it's racist, it's completely over the top. But it works. Rome eats it up. The people aren't just angry at Antony, they're terrified. Not of him, of her. And here's your open debate. Was Octavian genuinely frightened of Cleopatra's influence, or was she simply the most convenient scapegoat? Did he believe she posed a real threat to Roman traditions and power structures, or was it all theatre? Some argue that Cleopatra's power was inflated by Roman propaganda. Others insist she really was that dangerous, because she offered an entirely different model of rulership, feminine, divine, diplomatic, and gloriously foreign. You're in the palace again, watching Cleopatra hold court, calm amid the firestorm. Her children play in the garden, Caesarion reads scrolls twice his level, and Cleopatra, she's just sitting back, fingers steepled as the world turns against her. She fears nothing, you whisper to a servant. No, they say, she just plans for everything. Because Cleopatra knows something they don't. This isn't about Rome anymore. It's about who will write the future, and she intends to write it in hieroglyphs, honey, and heat. You're not sure when exactly it all starts to feel like a dream, or maybe a fever. Somewhere between the parades of leopard-drawn chariots and the midnight banquets where poets recite verses in 5 languages while dancers twirl in slow motion under lavender oil lamps. The boundaries between theatre and reality blur completely. Alexandria becomes a stage, and Cleopatra and Antony are the stars of the greatest love story / political rebellion ever performed. And you're somewhere backstage watching it all unfold with the creeping sense that Act 3 is going to be brutal. But for now, the performances are dazzling. The parties begin almost as soon as Antony returns, and they don't let up. Not even when the Nile floods too early. Not even when Roman envoys arrive, red-faced and panicked, begging for quiet. Antony shrugs them off. He's too busy becoming Dionysus reincarnated. Cleopatra is, once again, Aphrodite, or sometimes Isis, depending on the costume. They are not pretending anymore. They're embodying the gods. You sit at one of the long banquet tables in the royal gardens, drunk on fig wine, trying to keep track of which myth you're in. It doesn't really matter. The point is power, wrapped in silk, dipped in incense. Here's your historical fact. The inimitable Livers Club really existed. Antony and Cleopatra gathered a circle of elites to indulge in extravagant parties, often themed around gods, legends, and philosophical ideals. But the real brilliance, these weren't just indulgences. These were political statements. A direct challenge to Roman austerity, tradition, and control. They weren't just ruling Egypt, they were redefining what it looked like to rule the world. And people noticed. Envoys came from kingdoms as far as Judea and Parthia, curious or terrified. Even some Roman officials defected, preferring Cleopatra's glittering court to the cold grind of Octavian's politics. There were whispers of a new capital, a new empire, a future where Rome was no longer the centre, but Alexandria. Vibrant, sensual, strategic Alexandria. Still, not everyone in Egypt was cheering. There's a fringe fact that gets buried in the sparkle. Many native Egyptians viewed this golden couple with mixed feelings. Cleopatra, while embracing Egyptian customs more than any of her Ptolemaic ancestors, was still Greek by blood. And Antony, pure Roman. Their vision of divine rule didn't always land with the farmers, the priests, the provincial elites. But Cleopatra knew how to walk that line, how to be both goddess and woman, foreigner and native, seductress and mother. She had done it before, she was doing it again. And oh, how she played the role. You remember one night in particular, Antony sulking over a military blunder, some minor defeat in Armenia. He paces the courtyard in a rage, throws a wine jug at a wall, mutters curses in Latin. Cleopatra doesn't flinch. She waits until he's quiet, then calls for her attendants. Within hours, the palace has been transformed into a mock Roman victory march. Musicians blare fake battle songs, servants dress as conquered generals and kneel dramatically. Antony, forced to laugh, finally does. He's smiling by the end of the night, wrapped in velvet, eating roasted boar while Cleopatra toasts to conquests yet to come. That's the seduction, not the sex, not even the flattery. It's the way she rewrites failure into myth, wraps your wounds in laughter, makes you forget how close you came to losing. She gives men their own dreams, polished, upgraded, gilded. But Rome is still watching. And Octavian? Oh, he's sharpening his sword with every banquet. His propaganda machine hums non-stop now. He releases stories of Cleopatra performing love spells, of Antony kneeling before her throne like a slave, of Roman legions being bribed with pearls and poison. He doesn't care if it's true, he cares if it sticks. And it does. Slowly, poison seeps into the Roman bloodstream. Antony is called a traitor. Cleopatra a witch. The language gets nastier, more cartoonish. But it works. When the mark of Roman loyalty starts to shift. Now here's the open scholarly debate. Were Antony and Cleopatra aware of just how much damage was being done to their reputation in Rome? Some believe they underestimated Octavian's political genius, thinking charm and legacy would be enough. Others argue Cleopatra saw the danger clearly, but refused to bow to it. She had bowed before, to Caesar, to the Senate, not again. This time they would fight. But what's fascinating is how they double down. Antony formally divorces Octavia, Octavian's sister. A deliberate, loud insult. Cleopatra, in response, stages a wedding of sorts. A ceremony not officially recognized by Roman law, but filled with divine imagery, symbolic vows, and public displays of unity. You're there in the palace courtyard, watching, as Cleopatra glides forward in white and gold, her eyes locked on Antony's. It's a performance, yes, but something more. You see a flicker in her? Hope? Defiance? Maybe both. They declare their children rulers of vast territories. Caesarion is now styled not just as Julius Caesar's son, but as his true heir. In Alexandria, scrolls are printed declaring him king of kings, superior even to Rome's adopted son Octavian. And Rome hears every word. War becomes inevitable. It starts in whispers, supply lines being cut, trade routes delayed. Then it grows louder, fleet movements, border skirmishes, alliances shifting. Octavian petitions the Senate to strip Antony of his titles, claiming he's been corrupted by a foreign queen. He even discovers Antony's will, allegedly leaving land to Cleopatra and Caesarion, and requesting burial in Alexandria. Rome explodes. The final straw is the idea of a Roman general dying in Egypt under a queen's watch. It's unacceptable. Octavian uses this fury to declare war. But, interesting twist, not on Antony. On Cleopatra, that's the headline. That's the dagger. You're with her when the news arrives. She doesn't blink. She simply says, then we'll give them a war they'll remember. Because she knows the truth. Rome isn't scared of armies. It's scared of her. There's a particular stillness that comes before a war, the kind that doesn't hum or tremble but stretches. Long, tense, like a bowstring pulled just before the arrow flies. You feel that in Alexandria now. It's everywhere. The markets are quieter. The priests murmur longer prayers. Even the Nile seems to glide a little more slowly. Cleopatra walks through it all like she's walking through a storm she already knows the ending to. She's not afraid, at least not outwardly. She's prepared. You're standing beside her on the palace balcony as the sun rises over the harbour. The scent of frankincense mixes with seawater and warm bread. Ships dot the horizon, sleek dark silhouettes, ready for battle. Egyptian ships, Roman ships under Antony's banner. Cleopatra watches them like a general surveying her chessboard. Except this isn't chess. It's something bloodier. Here's your historical fact. In 32 BCE, after years of rising tensions, Octavian finally declares war. Not on Mark Antony, but on Cleopatra personally. It's a subtle but devastatingly effective move. He's not just fighting a political rival, he's framing the war as a defense of Roman values against a foreign threat. Not traitor versus general, but Rome versus Egypt. And Rome loves a good villain. So Octavian paints Cleopatra as the enemy. He floods the Roman press with imagery of her as a serpent-tongued seductress, a false goddess, an Egyptian Jezebel stealing Roman sons and corrupting their morals. He brings statues of her into the Senate to be mocked. He declares that she plans to rule Rome through Antony, and worse, through her son Caesarion. And Cleopatra? She leans in. She doesn't hide. She doesn't send envoys begging for peace. She doubles down on her image. She's painted in golden armour now, her face appearing on coinage alongside Antony's, their profiles matched, crowned as equals. You see her rehearsing speeches in the palace garden, her children watching from the shadows. She isn't preparing for survival, she's preparing for legacy. Here's your fringe fact. Cleopatra may have personally overseen the construction of new warships for the coming conflict. She wasn't just decorating them, she was modifying them, adding taller masts, stronger hulls, experimenting with unusual formations. One account suggests she even consulted with engineers about using mirrors to blind enemy ships in sunlight. That last one probably veers into legend, but still it tells you the scale of her imagination. She wasn't building a fleet, she was building a miracle. But not everyone in Alexandria shares her confidence. Tensions rise. Some Roman officers under Antony start to get cold feet. You overhear one in the halls whispering about defecting to Octavian. Cleopatra doesn't even pause. She has him arrested by morning, and 2 days later his body is dumped discreetly in the harbour. No trial, no public outcry, just a quiet message, doubt me, and drown. And that's when the gossip begins to shift again. This time not from Rome, from inside the city. Egyptians whisper that maybe the gods have grown quiet, that perhaps this queen, powerful though she is, has strayed too far from their favour. The omens feel strange. A cobra nest found under the temple steps, a blood moon over the lighthouse. The priests are nervous, and you know what fear does. It festers, but Cleopatra isn't shaken. She hosts another grand procession. Yes, another. This one dedicated to Isis, parading through the streets in a golden litter, dressed in sheer linen, crowned in ostrich feathers. Her attendants chant. Incense clouds the air, citizens kneel, and still she looks straight ahead. Because here's the thing about Cleopatra. She understands that fear is best countered not with reassurance, but with spectacle. You don't soothe people with logic. You mesmerize them into loyalty. And that's exactly what she does with Antony. You see him start to unravel, just slightly, during these final months. There's a stiffness in his jaw now, a roughness in his voice that wasn't there before. He drinks more, stares out at the sea too long. His letters from Rome go unopened on his desk. He's a war hero. Yes, but this is the first time he's realizing what it means to fight a losing battle before the battle begins. But Cleopatra never wavers. One night he tells her, "We don't stand a chance." She replies, "That's what makes it noble." And here's your scholarly debate. Did Cleopatra actually believe they could win the war? Some argue, yes, that with enough ships, money and magic, she believed they could outmaneuver Octavian's superior forces. Others believe she knew the odds were impossible, but chose to meet them head-on for the sake of her image, her children, and the story history would tell. Because there's a strange kind of power in losing beautifully. And so they prepare. You watch the dock swell with activity. Soldiers polishing armour, scribes copying last-minute orders, children watching from rooftops. Cleopatra visits each harbour district personally, inspecting ships, blessing captains, distributing coins marked with her symbol, a sun disk flanked by cobras. She whispers to her sons about gods and stars and how to ride the future like a wave. And yet, behind all of this, there's a tension, a strain. She doesn't say it aloud, but you see it in the way she clutches Caesarian's hand a little too tightly. The way she lingers over breakfast, the way she takes longer to choose her earrings, as if one wrong gem might shift fate. Because she knows what Octavian is willing to do. He doesn't care about victory, he cares about annihilation. And when men fight like that, history stops being a script and becomes a storm. Still, Cleopatra plays her role. Every evening she and Antony dine in full regalia, flanked by torches and lions and live music. They dance, they toast to gods, they sleep in linen tents surrounded by guards, pretending just a little that they still rule the world. And in those moments you forget. You forget that war is days away. You forget that the tides are already turning. You forget that Rome has never lost to seduction. But you remember, the moment you hear the sails unfurl and the war horns call from the bay, that this story doesn't end in silk. It ends in fire. You barely sleep the night before the battle, not because of fear, but because Alexandria itself seems to be holding its breath. The city doesn't buzz the way it usually does. It creaks, like something ancient shifting under too much weight. You lie awake listening to the wind press against the shutters, and for a moment you imagine the Nile retreating, like even the river wants no part of what's coming. At dawn, Cleopatra dresses for war, not in armour, in authority. She wears a white linen gown cut with silver thread, a wide collar of lapis lazuli, and her headdress crowned with the uraeus, the royal cobra, coiled and poised. Her face is unreadable, her eyes painted in long black strokes that seem more weapon than decoration. She isn't playing Isis today. She is Isis, and everyone in the palace knows it. You follow her to the harbour, where the fleet waits. Here's your historical fact. The Battle of Actium, fought in 31 BC, was a naval showdown off the western coast of Greece between Octavian's forces and the combined fleets of Cleopatra and Antony. Though technically commanded by Antony, Cleopatra provided a large portion of the ships, supplies, and strategic planning. Her presence was not ceremonial. She was on the water, in her own flagship, commanding. The ships are vast and beautiful, Egyptian vessels lined with red sails and painted eyes, Roman galleys bulked with iron rams and siege weapons. The harbour gleams with gold plating and glints of sun off spears. Cleopatra boards her ship in silence. No fanfare, no speeches. Just a nod to her commanders and a glance to the east, where the sky is already bruising with tension. Antony joins her shortly after, looking exhausted. He hasn't slept. He's been up all night with his generals arguing strategy. You can tell they disagreed. Antony wanted to draw Octavian into a land battle, but the ships were ready, and Cleopatra pressed for the sea. In the end, strategy bent to inevitability. Octavian had forced their hand. The water would decide everything. And this is where it gets messy, because here's the fringe fact. No one knows exactly why the battle fell apart the way it did. Ancient sources conflict. Some say Cleopatra panicked. Others say Antony hesitated. Some claim Octavian simply outmaneuvered them, but what is clear is that during the battle, Cleopatra's fleet turned mid-combat and sailed away, and Antony followed. But let's back up. You're aboard Cleopatra's flagship as the battle begins. The wind is wild, snapping the sails like whips. Drums echo from ship to ship. Orders are shouted in Greek, Egyptian, Latin. Antony's ships launch forward in tight formations, trying to pin Octavian's leaner, faster galleys. For a few minutes it looks promising. Cleopatra watches from her stern, eyes locked on the horizon. Fingers gripping the edge of the deck. Then something shifts. A line breaks. A Roman commander defects. One of Antony's ships catches fire. The formation crumbles like dry papyrus. Cleopatra doesn't flinch. She gives no visible order. But suddenly her fleet begins to pull back, not in a frenzy, not in surrender, in unison, controlled. That's the moment history starts whispering its theories. Did she lose faith in Antony's leadership? Was it a pre-planned escape? A signal misunderstood? Betrayal? A backup plan? Even now historians argue over it. Some say Cleopatra was watching the tide turn and made the only survivable choice. Others say she abandoned Antony to save Egypt, or at least herself. But what you see from the deck doesn't look like fear. It looks like a pivot, a calculated one. The flagship turns, slowly, catching the wind like a dancer shifting her weight. Behind her, Antony sees and follows. He doesn't ask questions, he just leaves. Some call it love, others call it weakness. But from your view on the water, it looks like surrender. Not to Cleopatra, but to reality. Octavian wins the battle. It's not clean. His forces are battered, his ship's limping. But Antony and Cleopatra's retreat guts morale. Their soldiers, leaderless, lose the will to fight. Within hours, the tide of war has fully turned. You watch from the deck as the smoke of burning ships rises in curling black spirals. The sea is red in places. The wind carries the bitter stench of oil and iron. And Cleopatra, she doesn't cry, she doesn't speak. She returns to Alexandria that night in silence. The city greets her with torchlight and tension. The priests keep their distance, the servants keep their heads down. She walks barefoot through the palace halls, blood from a battle wound still crusted on her ankle, and goes straight to the temple of Isis. You follow Sia, because you have to see what a queen does after losing a war she helped start. Inside the temple, she kneels, not to pray, to think. And here's the open scholarly debate. What was Cleopatra's plan after Actium? Some argue she intended to flee, to India perhaps, or to Ethiopia. There are ancient references to plans of escape, even alliances with distant kingdoms. Others suggest she hoped to negotiate, to buy peace with treasure, or with Caesarion's claim. Some even believe she was preparing for suicide from that moment forward, crafting her legacy while she still had control of the narrative. But you watch her, candlelight flickering on her face, and it doesn't look like someone planning an ending. It looks like someone reworking the script. Because Cleopatra knows this isn't just about Antony anymore. It never really was. This war was about her image, her power, her threat to the Roman machine. And if she's going to lose, she won't lose like a woman forgotten. She'll lose like a legend, so she begins again. Back at the palace, she reorganizes her court, tightens her inner circle, sends Caesarion into hiding under the protection of loyal commanders. She counts the treasury, she counts her enemies. She smiles bitterly and says, "They'll come for my gold first, then for my throne, then for my face." You ask what she means by that. She turns to you and says, "History never writes about women like me without a villain's mask. If they're going to paint me a monster, I'll choose the shape of the monster myself." And that's the real seduction. Not of men, of time. Cleopatra isn't trying to win anymore. She's trying to become unforgettable. Alexandria is quieter now, not dead, just waiting. The kind of silence you hear in a theatre between scenes, when the curtain hangs heavy and everyone's holding their breath for the next line. But backstage, it's chaos. The palace staff move in tighter circles. The royal guards sharpen blades at night and whisper about desertion by morning. The gold-trimmed doors are shut more often than open, and Cleopatra, she's moving like a woman who knows the final chapter is already written, but insists on editing it anyway. She no longer wears the wide smile for crowds. No more divine processions, no more feasts with roses raining from the ceiling. Her makeup is thinner now, her jewellery simpler, and yet somehow she looks more like a queen than ever, all spine, no distraction. You find her one morning at her desk, surrounded by scrolls and ledgers, personally calculating what's left of the royal treasury. She looks up. "How much gold," she asks you softly, "does it take to buy back a kingdom?" You don't have an answer, because even you know it won't be enough. Here's your historical fact. After the defeat at Actium in 31 BCE, Cleopatra returned to Alexandria to regroup. She tried everything, rebuilding military forces, shoring up internal support, and even sending envoys to Octavian to negotiate peace. She still had wealth, influence, a strategic port city. She wasn't without leverage, but she was losing it, fast. And Antony, he's unravelling. The man who once stood like a bronze statue in Rome, who shouted speeches louder than a legion's war cry, now wanders the palace with wine-stained lips and trembling hands. You see him on the veranda, staring out at the sea, muttering to himself in Latin, like he's trying to rewrite the past with enough repetition. He starts holding secret meetings with what's left of his loyal Roman officers, trying to piece together a defence. He promises reinforcements that don't exist, ships that were burned months ago. At one of these gatherings, Cleopatra enters the room without warning. She doesn't say anything, just stands in the doorway, watching Antony's fantasy collapse into silence. Then she turns and walks away, and not one man stops her. And here's your fringe fact. Ancient accounts describe Cleopatra locking herself in a tomb-like chamber within the palace and stockpiling treasure there. Gold, rare spices, priceless art. Some say she turned it into a kind of shrine, or vault, or escape plan. Others believe it was her way of preparing for death. But what you see when you walk with her through those heavy bronze doors is something different. It's her final act. The room is cold, the walls lined with treasures, scrolls, and silk-wrapped statues. Cleopatra moves through it like she's arranging props. She places a golden bust of Caesarion at the centre. Behind it, paintings of her children, stacks of official decrees, her finest headdresses, a theatre of memory. And the look on her face? She's not mourning, she's preserving. Because Cleopatra knows something most people only learn too late. Power dies, but myth lingers. If she's going to fall, she's going to control how the fall is remembered. Every statue, every inscription, every whisper from servant to street vendor, it matters, and that's where the scholarly debate flares up. Did Cleopatra truly believe she could still save her throne? Or had she already accepted that this was about image? About making sure her children had a story to carry even if they had no crown? Some say she was bargaining to the end. Others say she was writing her own obituary in real time. Watching her now, you can't tell the difference. Meanwhile, the world tightens around her. Octavian's ships begin appearing on the edge of the horizon. His messengers arrive slow and smug. Their words drip with civility, but the meaning is clear: surrender. Cleopatra responds politely. She sends back gifts, letters written in elegant Greek. Gestures of diplomacy, but the offers are all refused. One night she invites you to sit with her in the palace garden. The moonlight paints the columns silver, and the sweet smell of lotus wafts from the reflecting pool. She's quiet for a long time, then says, "Do you know why they fear me?" You shake your head. "It's not because I'm powerful, it's because I'm not afraid to be powerful and feminine. They don't know what to do with that." She sips her wine slowly, then adds, "Men who rule are remembered as great. Women who rule are remembered as monsters, or myths. I intend to be both." That's the seduction Cleopatra has always used, not just of men, but of narrative. She's not just trying to stay alive, she's trying to stay eternal. And here's where things fracture. Octavian reaches Egypt. His army floods into the outskirts of Alexandria like a rising tide. The walls aren't enough, the guards aren't enough, not anymore. Antony rides out with what remains of his force, trying to hold them at the gates. He fails. You're in the palace when he returns, bloodied and broken, his face hollow. He stumbles into Cleopatra's chamber and collapses onto the floor, whispering that the gods have left him. She kneels beside him, her expression calm, her hands firm. She lifts his head and says, "Then become one." That night she sleeps beside him in silence. No speeches, no tears, because by now they both know this is the end of the empire they imagined, but not the end of her. The next morning she puts on her white robes. No gold, no fanfare, just dignity. She meets with her advisors, sends final instructions for the protection of Caesarion, and signs a document releasing her wealth to her children, should any survive what comes next. And then she retreats to her tomb chamber again. This time not as a curator, but as a queen preparing for siege. And here's the real tragedy. Cleopatra had offered peace, she had offered wealth, she had even offered herself, negotiating directly with Octavian, promising to abdicate in favour of Caesarion, to withdraw from power entirely. Octavian refused, because this was never just about conquest. It was about erasing her. You sit by her side, watching, and as the city darkens under Roman banners, she sighs. "They'll say I destroyed Antony." She looks at you. "But you and I will know they destroyed each other. I only chose not to follow." And just like that, the queen leans back, closes her eyes, and waits for the knock at the door that ends Act 4. Because what comes next, that's the final illusion. The knock never comes gently. It arrives with the crack of sandal soles on marble, the rustle of Roman cloaks, the sharp scrape of metal against the doorframe. You hear it before Cleopatra does, standing outside her tomb chamber with a bowl of myrrh and a warning caught in your throat. The palace is under full Roman control now. Octavian's men in every corridor, his shadow pressing in from every angle. The war is over. The conqueror is here. But Cleopatra, she isn't conquered. Not yet. She's seated on a low stone bench, wrapped in linen the colour of bone, a golden cobra pinned at her shoulder. Her hair is braided tightly down her back. She has the look of someone who's about to attend her own funeral and intends to outshine everyone there. When you tell her the Romans are here, she simply nods. "Then we're out of time," she says, rising. "Here's your historical fact. After Antony's final defeat and suicide in 30 BCE, Octavian entered Alexandria, and Cleopatra was taken prisoner. Not in chains, but closely guarded. According to Roman records, she was brought to him to negotiate her fate and the fate of her children. Octavian expected submission. What he got instead was one last act of audacious control, but let's rewind just slightly. Antony had tried to kill himself first. That part's true. He received false news, whether by accident or by clever trick, that Cleopatra had already died by suicide. In despair, he fell on his sword. It didn't kill him immediately. You were there when the blood started pouring, when his fingers slipped on the marble, when the palace guards scattered like rats. He asked for Cleopatra with a gasp and a prayer, and she came. dragged him up into her tomb like a dying soldier returned to his temple. He bled on her robes, whispered that he'd failed her, that the gods had turned their faces, and Cleopatra held him, her face unreadable, and said, "We'll rewrite the story." He died in her arms, not as a war hero, not as a Roman, as her consort, her twin flame, her co-conspirator, another broken myth, slipping into legend. And now, it's her turn. Here's your fringe fact. Cleopatra had an audience with Octavian after Antony's death. Some records say she tried to seduce him, like Caesar, like Antony, offering wealth, allegiance, even herself. Others argue she begged for her children's lives and Caesarion's recognition. And some say she did none of that. That she stood tall in front of the soon-to-be emperor and simply refused to grovel. You picture the meeting in your mind, Octavian seated, cool as stone, his expression carved into eternal judgment. Cleopatra still regal but stripped of her court, her army, her illusions. No gods, no gold, just the woman and the myth, and the child she's trying to protect. "I will not be paraded through your streets," she tells him, not a threat, a truth. Because here's the thing about Octavian. He wants her alive, not out of mercy, but for the show. He plans to march her through Rome in chains, crown ripped from her brow, her dignity burned away under the stares of thousands. He wants her death slow, public, humiliating. That's how you kill a legend. And Cleopatra knows it. So she waits, watches, calculates. She's kept under guard in the mausoleum, now sealed from the main palace. Octavian posts soldiers at every entrance, thinking she'll try to escape. But he forgets Cleopatra's power has never come from running. It comes from choosing. One day she receives word. Caesarion has been captured and executed on Octavian's orders. The last heir, the last living link between her and Caesar. Gone. She doesn't weep. But that night, she sits with you in the flickering candlelight, her fingers tracing the lines of a faded mural, Isis lifting the dead Osiris into the next life. "They never understood," she says quietly. "They thought seduction was about love." She looks at you. It was always about freedom. And that's when you know she's done. Here's your open scholarly debate. How did Cleopatra die? The traditional story told by Plutarch and echoed for centuries says she used a venomous asp smuggled into her tomb in a basket of figs to bite herself and end her life. Other sources claim poison. Some suggest she had help. A few modern scholars argue it wasn't suicide at all, but assassination staged by Octavian to look like one. You were there, and you still don't know. What you do remember is this. She asked for a fig basket. She dismissed all but 2 of her attendants. She wore her white linen robe and the gold cobra pin. She sat down on the edge of the tomb beside Antony's body, and she whispered something you didn't hear. By the time the guards broke down the door, it was over. 3 bodies lay still on the floor. Cleopatra, her loyal handmaidens, no signs of struggle, no spilled blood, just the scent of lotus oil, the cool echo of silence, and the queen lying beside the man she'd risen and fallen with. Octavian stood over her body and said nothing. He didn't smile, didn't gloat, because even in death she'd denied him his victory. She hadn't given him her shame, she hadn't given him her story. That belonged to her. And now she becomes a ghost, a symbol, a problem for historians and poets and painters for centuries to come. Did she die for love, for country, for pride? You don't know, but you do know she didn't die afraid. She died exactly the way she lived. On her own terms, crowned, composed, and one step ahead of the empire trying to erase her. After her death, Alexandria doesn't mourn the way cities usually do. There are no public laments, no weeping masses in the streets, no sudden collapse of order. Instead, the city folds in on itself, quiet, tense, as if holding its breath again. Only this time there's no exhale coming. Cleopatra is gone, and with her the last illusion of autonomy. You feel it in the way the vendors pack up early, in the way the priests stop chanting quite so loudly. Even the Nile runs a little duller, like the goddess who loved it has finally turned away. Octavian does what conquerors do best. He starts rearranging the furniture, literally and figuratively. Statues are pulled down, coins are melted. Any image of Cleopatra in regal fellowship or regal defiance? Scrubbed. He claims Egypt not as a partner state or an ally, but as property, Rome's newest province, and he makes sure to announce it loudly in temples and forums alike that he has tamed the serpent of the Nile. Here's your historical fact. In the immediate aftermath of Cleopatra's death, Octavian annexed Egypt, placing it under his direct control. It became his personal possession, separate from the Senate and the other Roman provinces. Why? Because Egypt was rich, independent, and politically dangerous. Controlling it gave Octavian near unmatched leverage, both economically and militarily. And with Cleopatra out of the way, there was no one left to challenge him in the east. But her ghost lingers. You feel it everywhere. In the cold hush of her empty throne room, in the lingering scent of lotus oil on the breeze, in the whisper of her name between servants who once bowed to her, now forced to bow to Rome. She's become legend instantly, a story already slipping into myth even as Octavian tries to nail it shut. That's the thing about seduction. It doesn't die with the body. It seeps into memory, into history, into art. Octavian is smart enough to know that, which is why he starts editing. Here's your fringe fact. Octavian, soon to be Augustus, orders the rewriting of Cleopatra's image. In official records, she becomes a temptress, a foreign threat, a sorceress who ruined great Roman men. Her intellect, minimized, her diplomacy, omitted, her legacy, molded into a cautionary tale. She becomes the ultimate bad woman in Roman history, a warning to others who might dream too loudly in eyeliner and silk. And here's the open scholarly debate. How much of what we know about Cleopatra is truth? And how much is Roman spin? Did she die by aspi bite or poison? Did she truly drain Rome of its morals, or was that just post-war propaganda? Did she seduce two of Rome's greatest men because of her looks, or because she outsmarted them? The truth is probably buried somewhere in the ruins of Alexandria, sealed behind the tomb no one's ever found. But you know one thing for sure, she would have hated the narrative that came after her. In Rome, statues are raised, not of Cleopatra, but of Augustus. Parades celebrate his liberation of Egypt. A golden age begins, and with it, the erasure of everything Cleopatra stood for: sovereign female rule, cultural fusion, sensual power, political seduction. All of it swept into the corner like dust, yet not quite forgotten. Because here's what Octavian didn't count on. Stories travel. Poets write verses, some scathing, yes, but some curious. Artists paint her as exotic, tragic, beautiful, monstrous. Historians pick apart her reign for centuries, always obsessed with the same themes. Was she evil or brilliant? Was she reckless or revolutionary? Was she merely Caesar's and Antony's lover? Or were they hers? You stand in the now-abandoned palace garden, watching ivy climb the broken columns. Somewhere beneath your feet, Cleopatra is buried, perhaps beside Antony as she had requested. No one knows for sure. Octavian kept the location secret, and maybe he feared grave robbers, or maybe he feared worshippers, because the strangest part of all, even in death, Cleopatra still had power. Rome couldn't erase her, not completely. She lived on in whispers, in painted frescoes, in coin imprints too worn to melt down. Every time her name was spat by a senator, it was kept alive. Every smear campaign ensured she was never forgotten. The more they tried to reduce her, the more they mythologized her. That's Cleopatra's final seduction. You don't even need to know the facts to be drawn in. Her image survives better than the truth ever could. Every generation redresses her. Renaissance Cleopatra, Shakespearean Cleopatra, Elizabeth Taylor. Cleopatra, the goddess, the lover, the monster, the queen, and yet none of them quite match the woman you knew. You remember her pacing barefoot through the palace with scrolls under her arm, scolding generals and charming poets. You remember her dipping figs in honey while discussing naval strategy, or whispering to Caesarion about how to walk like a king. You remember her laughter, sharp, sudden, real, not a queen's laughter, a woman's. Octavian builds his empire. He becomes Augustus, first emperor of Rome. Peace returns, prosperity, the golden age. But Cleopatra is still there, tucked into the folds of every speech about foreign threat and Roman purity. She's the shadow behind his triumph. And even now you wonder, did she know it would be like this? Did she plan for the story to survive her, even if the woman didn't? You think of her final words, if she had any. Maybe they weren't poetic. Maybe they were tired. Maybe she just said, "Make sure they remember me." And oh, they did. They still do. She seduced the most powerful men in the world, yes. But more impressively, she seduced the centuries. Because you can burn a palace. You can conquer a kingdom, but you can't kill a legend that knows how to write itself. You feel it before you see it, the end arriving not with a roar but with a ripple, like someone's dropped a coin into still water, and the concentric rings are just now reaching shore. The palace, or what's left of it, breathes in whispers now. The marble halls echo with the kind of footsteps that don't belong to royalty. Roman soldiers in formation, bureaucrats with scrolls, new rules posted in Latin instead of Greek. Cleopatra is gone. Antony is gone. But something worse remains, the slow systematic dismantling of what they tried to build. And outside Alexandria, the world is shifting fast. Octavian's war is over, but his narrative campaign is just beginning. Rome is united under a single ruler now, him. The Senate, such as it is, rubber stamps every move. The people, hungry for peace after years of chaos, praise his leadership. The temples begin offering prayers to his divine guidance. And as for Egypt, it becomes the jewel in his imperial crown, a prize too valuable to share. Here's your historical fact. The Battle of Actium wasn't just a turning point for Cleopatra and Antony, it was the final nail in the coffin for the Roman Republic. Octavian's victory at sea gave him total dominance, not just militarily, but morally. He cast himself as the saviour of Roman tradition, the one man who could restore order after decades of civil war. Within a few years, he would become Augustus, Rome's first emperor, and Cleopatra would become nothing more than a footnote in his carefully curated version of history. But Cleopatra doesn't disappear quietly, not even in death. Because as Octavian begins consolidating power, something curious happens. Cleopatra starts appearing more and more in the public conversation. Not as herself, of course, as an idea, a warning. You hear her name hissed through Roman markets, whispered in forums, spat from the mouths of aging senators. She bewitched Caesar. She destroyed Antony. She wanted to place her bastard son on the Roman throne. The words are almost comically exaggerated. Serpents, poisons, spells, but they stick. Because here's your fringe fact. Rome didn't just defeat Cleopatra. It needed her to be a villain. It needed her to justify Antony's fall, Caesar's weakness, and the Republic's death. So Cleopatra was reshaped into exactly what the empire required. Not a ruler, but a cautionary tale. Not a mother, but a manipulator. Not a strategist, but a siren. And that's when you realize this is the real battle. The battle of the sexes. The slow, grinding war of image over reality. Power over truth. They call her dangerous, and in a way they're right. Because Cleopatra's danger wasn't her beauty. It wasn't even her ambition. It was her control. Over men, over kingdoms, over stories. And Octavian? He wants that control back. So Rome begins the purge. Coins with her face are melted. Scrolls mentioning her victories disappear. Statues are smashed or reinterpreted. Historians are encouraged, if not outright ordered, to paint her in the harshest light possible. One famously dry account even describes her as having a shrill voice and a cunning tongue, as if that's the worst crime a woman in power could commit. And here's the scholarly debate. How much of what we know about Cleopatra is actual biography, and how much is branding? The surviving sources are almost entirely Roman, written by men who never met her, who lived years or even generations after her death. Their Cleopatra is a caricature, seductive, manipulative, foreign. But how much of that is truth, and how much is projection? You, of course, remember a very different woman. You remember her leaning over maps at midnight, her brow furrowed as she discussed grain distribution and flood patterns. You remember her playing politics like a master pianist, shifting between diplomacy and intimidation with the same breath. You remember the sharpness in her gaze when someone lied to her, and the softness too when she looked at her children. But those details don't survive history. Not the kind Rome writes, anyway. What survives are the symbols, a golden asp, a barge of silk, a throne crumbling under empire. Still, not everyone buys the Roman version, far from it. In the eastern provinces, especially among Egyptian scholars and the native priesthood, Cleopatra's memory persists in subtler sacred ways. Temples continue lighting oil lamps in her honour well into the 1st century. Wall carvings remain untouched, depicting her as Isis reborn, even when Roman officials try to whitewash them. Stories are passed down orally, myth blended with memory, detail wrapped in devotion. Some say she didn't die at all, that she escaped, sailing to a distant island with her children, leaving a decoy behind. Others claim she ascended to the heavens, her soul carried into the stars, and others still whisper that she'll return when Egypt is free again, wearing gold and fire, carrying the Nile in one hand and Rome's silence in the other. You sit now in the library, what remains of it, scrolls piled around you, each bearing some version of her name, some sympathetic, some cruel, some confused. They call her a queen, a lover, a monster, a martyr, but every scroll, no matter how biased, no matter how flawed, proves one thing. She wasn't forgotten, and that might be the greatest seduction of all. Not the seduction of Caesar, not of Antony, not even of her people, but of time itself, because Cleopatra didn't just shape her empire, she shaped her story. And now it belongs to the world, not to Rome, not to Octavian, to you. It's the quiet that feels strangest now, the same city that once pulsed with music, prayer, laughter, seduction and strategy, now moves with the hush of a tomb. Alexandria isn't dead, it's subdued. Like it's waiting for someone to say her name again. But they don't. Not openly, not in the Roman-guarded streets, where Latin now echoes off stone walls once inscribed with hieroglyphs and poetry. Cleopatra's face is gone from the coins. Her statues are either toppled or recarved to look like someone less threatening. And yet, you can still feel her. You walk past the palace where she once held court, and though its halls have been stripped, repainted and Romanized, something lingers in the corners. A scent, a rhythm, an energy that feels distinctly hers. It clings to the silk-covered walls and the worn tiles beneath your sandals. Even the sunlight falls differently here, like it remembers how she used to stand in it, crowned and laughing and 2 steps ahead of everyone in the room. But Rome is relentless. Octavian, now Augustus, is already building his new world, and Egypt is a tool in that machine. A profitable one. He's not interested in resurrection, only in rebranding. He gives Alexandria a new future by burying its past. Here's your historical fact. After Cleopatra's death in 30 BCE, Egypt became a Roman province directly controlled by Augustus. He placed it under the authority of a prefect rather than a governor, meaning no senator could enter Egypt without his express permission. Why? Because he didn't trust the Senate. And more importantly, he didn't trust anyone with Cleopatra's old kingdom. It was too rich, too strategic, and too symbolic to hand off lightly. But even in death, Cleopatra was a problem. Too famous to forget, too complex to simplify. So Rome took the easiest path. They turned her into a story, a cautionary tale of female ambition. A beautiful mistake. You're there in a smoky tavern years later listening to 2 Roman scholars argue. One insists she was a seductress who wrecked empires. The other, slightly drunker, calls her a brilliant politician. They both get her wrong. But the important thing, they're still talking about her. Because Cleopatra didn't just play the game, she hacked it. She used Rome's obsession with legacy, honour and image against itself. She knew men like Caesar and Antony were so hungry for immortality they'd do anything to get it, even bind themselves to a queen from the wrong side of the sea. And then she took their ambition, wrapped it in silken myth, and built an empire of whispers. Here's a fringe fact for you. There were rumours, decades after her death, that Cleopatra's tomb held a secret. Some said it was filled with treasures untouched by Roman hands. Others claimed it contained letters written in her own hand, meant for her children, or perhaps even for the ages. The tomb, of course, has never been found. Archaeologists still chase it, imagining the secrets it might reveal. But maybe it's better that way. Maybe it's exactly what she wanted, one last mystery they could never solve. And here's where the scholarly debate really digs in. Was Cleopatra truly defeated? Sure, she lost her throne, her allies, her children. But did she lose her narrative? Or did she lock it in stone, ready to be unearthed only by those willing to look beyond the Roman lens? There's an argument to be made, and you feel it more strongly the longer you stay in this post-Cleopatra Egypt, that she won the war that mattered, not the one of ships and swords, the one of memory, because Octavian may have claimed her land, her treasure, even her children, but he could never quite claim her. You see it in the faces of the Egyptian people. They don't say her name anymore, not where Romans can hear, but they remember. They still place offerings at Isis temples with her likeness subtly carved on the wall. They still tell stories about the queen who loved her country more than her life, the queen who played Rome like a harp, the queen who vanished like a spell. You're in the palace ruins one morning when a young girl walks past, her sandals dusty, her face smudged with charcoal. She looks up at you and asks quietly, "Is it true she didn't fear death?" You want to say yes. You want to say she planned it all, that she died with dignity, her back straight and her eyes open, with an asp coiled around her arm like a lover. But the truth is you don't know. No one does. And maybe that's the point. Cleopatra didn't write her ending in marble. She wrote it in questions, in images, in symbols. She didn't let you see everything. She let you wonder. She made sure her name could never be spoken without a twinge of awe, confusion, or desire. She seduced the truth. And now, centuries later, you see the long shadow she cast not just on history, but on power itself. Every woman who dares to lead, to defy, to command attention, she walks through Cleopatra's echo. Every debate about what a woman can be, what she should want, what she's allowed to build, you'll find her fingerprints there. Not because she was perfect, but because she was unapologetic. And what Rome hated most wasn't her ambition. It was that she made them want her anyway. Even as they cursed her name, even as they crushed her kingdom, even as they tried and failed to silence her. So you stand in Alexandria watching Roman banners flap where her standard once flew, and you understand something too big to say aloud. They may have conquered Egypt, but Cleopatra, she conquered eternity. It's strange, what survives? Not the empire, not the alliances, not the ships or the soldiers or the golden barge gliding down the Nile. None of that lasts. What survives is gossip. That's the sediment history is built on. And Cleopatra, whether she planned it or not, left behind the juiciest trail of seductive, maddening gossip the world has ever known. You hear it in the villa of a Roman widow in Pompeii, where she gossips with her dinner guests about the Egyptian whore who destroyed 2 republics. You see it scratched into the side of an amphora in Rhodes. Cleopatra, Bonza, poisoner of minds. And centuries later it's painted in oil, carved in marble, sung in plays, over and over and over again. But here in Alexandria it's different. In the corners of old markets and under the shadow of crumbling temples, her name is still said with reverence. Whispered, not because of fear, but out of sacred habit. She's no longer Cleopatra the ruler or Cleopatra the seductress. She's something else now, part goddess, part ancestor, part unfinished sentence. The women here especially remember, not with facts but with tone, as if they're still trying to solve her or be her. You walk through the ruins of her palace, though much of it is now buried beneath the sea. The earth shifted, the coastline crumbled. The great halls where she once dined with Caesar and plotted with Antony are now home to fish and salt and thyme. Divers say the stone is still warm. Scholars argue about whether that's true, but honestly, it feels true. Here's your historical fact. Parts of Cleopatra's royal palace complex in Alexandria now lie underwater. Earthquakes and rising sea levels pulled large portions of the ancient city into the Mediterranean over the centuries. In recent decades, archaeologists have recovered columns, statues, and even coins. Tangible pieces of a kingdom long reduced to rumour. And what about her tomb? That's the question that never dies. Some say it was within the palace complex. Others argue it was placed somewhere outside the city at a temple dedicated to Isis. Every few years, a new discovery pops up, an underground chamber here, a sarcophagus there, but none have been confirmed. You can feel her in all of them, though. That's the maddening part. It's like she's playing one final game of hide-and-seek with history. Here's your fringe fact. In the early 2000s, archaeologists at Taposiris Magna, a temple west of Alexandria, found evidence of tunnels and burial shafts that some believe may lead to Cleopatra's tomb. Even now, the search continues. Some think it's a dead end here. Others believe she's there, waiting, perfectly preserved, ready to ruin someone's academic career in the best way possible. But maybe she didn't want to be found. Maybe she knew the power of mystery. Maybe Cleopatra understood, better than any ruler of her time, that control doesn't end with death. It's in the legacy, the way your story is told, the way your name makes people feel. She didn't need monuments that could be smashed or scrolls that could be burned. She needed a myth so thick and fragrant it would float through the centuries like the smoke of incense. And that's what she got. Now here's where the open scholarly debate takes a twist is. How much of Cleopatra's lasting legacy is hers, and how much was constructed for her by enemies, by admirers, by Hollywood, by generations of men and women projecting onto her image? Shakespeare turned her into a tragic heroine. The Renaissance turned her into a symbol of feminine beauty and decadence. The Victorians, hilariously, made her a cautionary tale about makeup and lust. Each version is wildly different. Each version insists this is the real Cleopatra. But none of them match the woman you knew. She was more dangerous than the tragedy, more brilliant than the seduction, more human than the myth. You remember her singing once, yes, singing softly in an ancient Egyptian dialect you didn't recognize. It was a private moment, hours after another political disaster, when Rome was breathing down her neck and the court was in crisis. She had removed her jewellery, slipped out of her ceremonial gown and was sitting on the floor beside a column, bare feet tucked under her, singing. She looked up and said, "They'll never believe I had a voice like this." And she laughed. That's the part no one puts in the plays. The laughter, the boredom, the joy. Everyone remembers the poison, the men, the gowns, but you remember the woman who stayed up late just to listen to the rain fall into the courtyard pond. The queen who memorised military schedules but also spent hours planning the perfect banquet menu, down to the placement of each olive. She ruled with her whole self, not just with her beauty or her bloodline, but with her humour, her rage, her intelligence, her weirdness. That's why she scared them. Not because she was a seductress, but because she didn't cut herself into pieces to make herself more palatable. And they punished her for it. Still are. Look around. Any woman in power. What's the first accusation? Too emotional. Too cold. Too sexual. Too calculating. Too ambitious. Cleopatra wasn't the first to be boxed in by contradictions, but she played those contradictions like instruments. She made them part of the music. You hear echoes of her every time someone tells a woman to tone it down, every time someone praises a powerful man and calls his female equal manipulative, every time someone looks at a woman leading and says, yes, but at what cost? The cost for Cleopatra was everything, but the return, well, you're still here, aren't you? Talking about her, wondering about her, telling her story for the 1000th time like it's new because it is new. Every time. She's not just seduction, she's the story of seduction and how it becomes history, and she's not finished yet. It's evening in Alexandria again, the kind of golden twilight that turns the city into honey, where every surface glows like it remembers something. You're sitting near the harbour now, on the edge of the city where Cleopatra once launched her fleet, where Antony once stared out to sea and saw ambition on the horizon. The waves slap lazily against the stone. Children laugh in the distance. Traders mutter to each other in a stew of languages. And over all of it, there's this haunting peace, like history has settled for a moment, catching its breath before whispering the next chapter. And yet, even in this stillness, she's not gone. You see her in the curve of the sailboats, modelled after the ships she designed. You hear her in the Egyptian-Greek accent still lacing the marketplace, the echo of a cosmopolitan queen who blurred borders before that word had a passport. You feel her most of all in the unease Rome never quite shed about her. Because here's the thing, when an empire kills a queen, it also creates an obsession. Cleopatra was not erased, she was engraved. But let's rewind to the moment right before the curtain closed. Here's your historical fact. In the final days of Antony's life, after Actium, after the failed counterattacks, after everything, they say he believed Cleopatra was dead. Whether he was lied to or simply assumed the worst, it doesn't matter. In a private chamber, wounded by betrayal and defeat and loss, Antony fell on his sword. Not with glory, but with confusion. It wasn't a clean death. It wasn't even heroic. It was desperate. And Cleopatra, upon hearing what had happened, had him carried to her tomb. There, he bled out in her arms. And here's the fringe detail that makes that moment unbearable. Cleopatra is said to have torn her clothes, smeared his blood on her face, and declared him a god. She wasn't just mourning, she was elevating, turning his failure into divinity, performing grief like a priestess, not just a partner. And maybe, just maybe, it wasn't performance at all. You sit with this for a while, because it's not the version that makes it into most retellings. Most stories rush through Antony's death to get to hers. They love a good snakebite. They love a queen who chooses death. But what they rarely stop to consider is this. Cleopatra watched the man she ruled beside die miserably. And then, with the full weight of Rome pressing in, she stood up, crowned herself in linen and gold, and walked forward into the end like she'd planned it. That's not seduction. That's control. Here's the open scholarly debate. Was Cleopatra's final act, her suicide, an escape, a protest, a political move to avoid humiliation? Or was it, as some argue, an act of strategic storytelling, a myth-making moment, a choice that said, "You may take my body, but you will never own my legacy"? What makes it even murkier is how thoroughly Octavian tried to shut it all down. After Cleopatra's death, he claimed victory. Of course he did. He said Egypt was liberated, that the East had been tamed. He even wrote poems, commissioned them, about how he had rescued Rome from the wicked queen. But you can hear the defensiveness in it, the insecurity, because no matter how many coins he minted with his own face, people were still talking about hers. Because here's what survived. Not the records, not the speeches, but the rumours that she chose her own death, that she smuggled a serpent into her chambers, that she smiled when she died, that she whispered Antony's name, that she wore her crown to the very end, that her final breath smelled like perfume. And the most ridiculous rumour of all? That she died knowing she'd win. Not the battle, not the kingdom, but the story. You don't know which ones are true, but honestly, you've started to understand it doesn't matter. Not to her. Cleopatra didn't care about being remembered accurately. She cared about being remembered powerfully. That's why her image persists like a perfume stain, impossible to scrub out, always lingering just beneath the surface. And that image, it's fractured, yes, contradictory, absolutely, but alive. The Romans couldn't decide if she was a goddess or a demon. Medieval Europe tried to lock her into morality plays. The Victorians clutched their pearls. The 20th century gave her Hollywood curves and winged eyeliner so sharp it could cut glass. Each era redressed her in its own fears and fantasies. And yet, there's still a piece missing, the real woman. The one who spoke 9 languages. The one who navigated a kingdom between 2 dying empires. The one who lost everything and still said no, I end this story. The one who ruled not because she seduced, but because she understood seduction better than anyone else alive. Because seduction, at its core, is the power to shape desire. To make someone want what you want them to want. Cleopatra didn't just use that power on men, she used it on history, and history has never quite recovered. You lean over the edge of the harbour, watching the waves slap lazily at the stone. Somewhere beneath this water, they say her palace sleeps, her throne, her bed, maybe even the tomb she died in. Divers still search, scholars still argue, tourists still speculate. She remains half glimpsed, half invented, entirely fascinating. And maybe that's her last victory, that even in death she cannot be possessed, not by Rome, not by scholars, not by myth. She remains hers forever. It starts with a whisper, the kind that carries farther than a shout. Somewhere deep in a Roman bathhouse maybe, or a smoky kitchen in a senator's home, someone leans in and says it softly. You know she wasn't even that beautiful. It's not an insult, it's a strategy. Because the easiest way to kill a legend, especially a woman's, is not with fire or iron. It's with dismissal. Erasure through belittlement. If you can't beat her brilliance, deny it existed in the first place. And so begins Cleopatra's next war. This one isn't fought on the Nile or in the Senate, it's fought in scrolls and marble busts, in footnotes and stage plays, in books written hundreds of years after her death by men who never heard her voice but were absolutely sure of what she must have sounded like. The war is over how she should be remembered, what she should look like, how she should sit and speak, whether she was a seductress or a sovereign, a villain or a victim. Here's your historical fact. Almost all the surviving accounts of Cleopatra's life come from Roman sources, men like Plutarch, Cassius Dio, and Suetonius, writing decades or even centuries after her death. They never met her. They weren't Egyptian. Their Rome had already erased hers, and yet they're the ones who shaped her legacy. Plutarch, for example, famously wrote, her beauty was in itself not altogether incomparable. Translation. She wasn't the most beautiful woman in the world, but when she spoke you were doomed. Her charm, her intelligence, her presence, those were the weapons. And it's strange, isn't it? That even as they try to minimize her, they can't help but describe the spell. You hear it again in Dio, that she had a piercing voice and a way of turning any room to her advantage. Always too much, too loud, too clever, too enchanting. And here's your fringe fact. Despite all the claims about her appearance, we have no definitive image of Cleopatra. No portrait, no sculpture, no painting created during her life has been confirmed as the one. Coins from her reign show a sharp nose, a strong jaw, intense eyes. Not a Roman Venus, not a Grecian ideal. A ruler, a forced symbol. Which leads to the scholarly debate that just won't die. What did Cleopatra really look like? It's a question that's been asked for centuries, as if beauty, or lack of it, can unlock the truth of her reign. As if her power must be explained through her face. But the truth is, the debate says more about us than it ever did about her, because we still don't know how to process a woman who seduced two of the most powerful men in history and commanded armies, and spoke multiple languages, and governed one of the wealthiest kingdoms of the ancient world. So we ask, was she pretty? You're in the ruins of a Roman villa now, decades after her death, watching the mosaic of a woman, tanned, reclining, with a snake coiled around her wrist. No name, no title, but the locals call her the Queen, and you know who they mean. They always do, because even when they try to erase her, they keep summoning her. She's too convenient to discard, too magnetic to ignore. Cleopatra becomes the template for every dangerous woman who follows. She is Lady Macbeth, she is Salome, she is Delilah, she is the femme fatale, the witch, the seductress, the woman whose desire becomes her weapon, and whose downfall becomes a morality tale. But you also see the resistance, in whispers from women who name their daughters after her, in papyrus texts buried in Egyptian sand that still call her Pharaoh, in sculptures centuries later where her eyes still smoulder. The Romans tried to control her image, but they couldn't control the way people felt when they saw her name, and that feeling, that strange sticky mix of reverence, fascination and discomfort, has outlasted every marble bust of Octavian. Because seduction, when wielded with strategy, becomes something bigger. It becomes memory. And Cleopatra understood that better than anyone. She didn't need to win every battle. She needed to be irresistible to history. And so far she's succeeding. You see it even now. Painters in Renaissance Florence recreating her death as high art. A pale arm draped across a silk-sheeted bed. The asp poised like an earring. Never mind that she likely died in a linen robe on a stone floor. That's not the point. The myth is the point. The drama, the tragedy. You see it centuries later in silent films, where Cleopatra becomes a vamp with coal-lined eyes and velvet gowns that defy logic and physics. She floats across screens, silent but powerful, the only woman who can make generals grovel and audiences lean forward in their seats. And then Elizabeth Taylor arrives, with gold wings and English vowels, and subtum let she is Cleopatra, at least for a generation. Even her scandals echo the Queen's. Married, divorced, adored, hated. Loved so fiercely that people forget what exactly she did to earn it. That's the real seduction, not lust, legacy. You're back in Alexandria now, staring at the sea where her ships once burned. A few tourists wander past, taking selfies where an empire fell. A child tosses a coin into the water, whispering a wish. You wonder if Cleopatra ever stood here like this, imagining the centuries to come, wondering how her name would taste in the mouths of strangers, hoping maybe that they'd feel a flicker of her flame, and if they did, would they know it was seduction, or would they just call it power? You're sitting in the back row of a modern university lecture hall now, lights dimmed, the screen at the front glowing with the pixelated face of a queen whose empire died over 2,000 years ago. The professor gestures toward a slide that reads Cleopatra, Queen Seductress or Strategist, and you hear the students shifting in their seats, scribbling notes, eyebrows raised, half intrigued, half unsure if this is history or gossip class. It's always the same debate. They want to pin her down, figure her out, reduce her to something they can test on a multiple-choice exam. Was she a mastermind or a homewrecker? Did she love Caesar or just use him? Was she brilliant? Or did she just get lucky being born with a title and a good eye for eyeliner? And here's your historical fact. Cleopatra is still one of the most written about women in human history. Thousands of books, countless articles, plays, films, documentaries, more than most Roman emperors, more than Alexander, more than Jesus depending on what metric you're using. Her name carries weight even in languages where her story was never taught. But the thing people still struggle to do after all this time is separate seduction from strategy. As if a woman can't do both. As if sensuality can't be a calculated political tool. As if softness is beauty, Mystery, intelligence, and ambition can't exist in the same body without combusting. You remember a time when Cleopatra walked into a council room of generals, old sunburned men who didn't even try to hide their disdain, and sat at the head of the table without waiting to be invited. She wore pearls that day, bright red lips, she smiled, and then she laid out a war plan that none of them could poke a hole through. By the end of the meeting, they were looking at her the way men do when they realise the woman they've underestimated just gave them orders in 3 languages. And here's your fringe fact. Cleopatra likely wrote medical and scientific texts during her lifetime, none of which survive, of course. But she was known to consult with physicians, astronomers, and mathematicians, even editing some of the works collected in the still-burning shadow of the Great Library. It's whispered that she knew how to calculate star charts, how to measure eclipses, how to mix cosmetics with antiseptics. So yes, she looked flawless. And yes, she probably knew exactly which natural minerals were best for keeping your skin fresh in the desert sun. And yet, ask the average person what they know about her. 9 times out of 10, she was sexy. So here comes the debate. Some scholars now argue that the modern feminist take on Cleopatra is overcompensating. That in trying to rescue her from Roman smear campaigns, we risk sanitizing her, turning her into a sterile political figure who never used seduction, who never fell in love, who never played the game. But you've been there. You watched her play it. She leaned into the power of her body and her brain. She didn't see them as opposites. She saw them as one engine, one arsenal, one crown, because seduction for Cleopatra wasn't about conquest, it was about control. She knew men were visual creatures. She knew they underestimated softness. She knew the world expected her to be either a goddess or a whore, and so she became both, at will. Because that's how you survive a game where the rules were never written for you. And the beauty of it is, she didn't hide this. She didn't pretend to be a man. She didn't cut her hair short and bark orders in armour just to gain respect. She ruled as a woman, unapologetically, lushly, tactically. And it worked until it didn't. Until the game swallowed her and spat out a sanitized empire, where the only stories that survived were the ones her enemies told. But then something unexpected happened. She started coming back, first in footnotes, then in art, then in pop culture, then in classrooms like this one, where the professor clicks to a slide showing an oil painting of her death, skin pale, snake poised, breasts modestly draped in velvet, that would have made no sense in 30 BCE. She's been painted as a victim, the professor says, but was she actually in control of her death? And you smile, because the answer is yes. You walk through a modern art museum in Paris, and there she is. Cleopatra reclined on a couch, wine at her side, servants kneeling. In another gallery in Berlin, she's shown holding her child not as Isis, but as a mother. Somewhere else, she's in drag as a Roman general. Elsewhere, she's a bare-chested symbol of revolution. No version quite true, all versions completely hers. And it keeps going. Cleopatra in music videos, Cleopatra on perfume bottles, Cleopatra in sci-fi retellings, in comic books, in video games, in political commentary. She's been rewritten more times than any man from her era. Why? Because she keeps seducing. Not just men now, but culture. She slips into every era's imagination, every generation's insecurities. She's never quiet, never absent. That's the thing no conqueror ever figured out. You can steal a throne, burn a flag, rewrite a law, but you can't cancel a queen who made herself irresistible. And here's what stings. Octavian, for all his power, all his discipline, all his empire building, he's boring, stable, orderly, a great administrator. But you don't feel anything when you say his name. But Cleopatra, say it out loud. It still feels like silk sliding off a blade. The tourists lean over the railings of the boats now, peering down into the shallow blue-green waters off the coast of Alexandria. Somewhere beneath them, somewhere beneath you, is Cleopatra. Or at least that's what they've been told. That her palace sleeps beneath the waves, waiting to be pulled into the light. And maybe her tomb is nearby too, tucked inside a flooded chamber, guarded by time and limestone and the complete indifference of history to anyone's schedule. The divers go in with cameras and oxygen tanks, scanning the seafloor like treasure hunters. They always say the same thing after they surface. It feels like she's still there. Not a corpse, not bones, but a presence, a shadow that doesn't quite fade, even when you shine lights on it. And that's the thing, you can reconstruct Cleopatra's world with marble and stone and digital overlays. But can you reconstruct her? That's where the real challenge begins. Here's your historical fact. No confirmed physical remains of Cleopatra have ever been found. No tomb, no body, no preserved royal chamber with her name carved into it. Her story and her very image comes from coins, second-hand Roman writings, and layers upon layers of artistic interpretation. What we know about her face is based mostly on assumptions and politically motivated guesses. So scholars, naturally, have tried to rebuild her. They've used coins, busts, and mummy skulls from the right time period. They've run facial reconstruction algorithms. This, they say, pointing at a 3D image, is what Cleopatra probably looked like. A woman with a sharp nose, a narrow jaw, deep-set eyes. And you want to believe it. You do, but part of you suspects the real Cleopatra would laugh. Because how do you reconstruct a woman who built herself from myth? Here's your fringe fact. Cleopatra was known to wear theatrical makeup not just for fashion, but as a conscious piece of her political persona. The thick, coal-lined eyes? That wasn't just style, it was symbolism. Power in black pigment. A visual reference to gods, to immortality, to the strength of the Nile. Her image was a message, curated and deliberate, long before social media influencers made it a business model. And so this is the real question. What do you see when you close your eyes and picture her? Is it Elizabeth Taylor in that golden headpiece? Is it a shadowy figure on a barge of silk? Is it a queen holding a scroll in one hand and a dagger in the other? All of them, none of them. Because here comes the scholarly debate that refuses to sit quietly in the archives. Can you separate Cleopatra the person from Cleopatra the persona? Was she a woman doing her best to rule a collapsing dynasty with a shrinking budget and 2 unreliable Roman boyfriends? Or was she a calculated genius who constructed an empire of image, spinning seduction and statecraft into the same silk? Most say she was both. But you've seen how even that complexity doesn't satisfy. Scholars try to label her. Feminists try to rescue her. Empires tried to erase her. Artists tried to worship her. And through it all, Cleopatra refuses to resolve. She's not a puzzle. She's a mirror. Because every generation gets the Cleopatra they deserve. In times of war, she's the traitor. In times of progress, she's the pioneer. In times of moral panic, she's the temptress. In times of artistic revolution, she's the muse. And now, in this era of fractured narratives and identity crises and Instagram filters, she's all of it at once. You walk through a digital Cleopatra exhibit in a museum in London. Interactive, high-tech, a dozen voices arguing over her legacy at once. One screen flashes, was she black? The next, was she Arab? The next, was she whitewashed? And each screen answers differently. Not with facts, but with positions. Because identity is a battleground now too. And Cleopatra's body, real or imagined, has become the battlefield. But the deeper you go into this reconstruction rabbit hole, the more you start to feel like you're chasing a ghost who's always just out of reach. And maybe that's intentional. Maybe Cleopatra knew exactly what she was doing when she left so little behind. Not because she was careless, but because she understood something critical. If you give people a full portrait, they'll critique it. But if you give them a silhouette, they'll fill it with themselves. You're in the back of a cafe now, in modern-day Alexandria, watching the sea through smudged glass, and a group of teenage girls at the next table are watching TikToks about Cleopatra. They laugh, rewind, argue about whether she was a baddie or just really smart. One of them says, "Honestly, I'd follow her if she ran today." You smile, because that's the new form of reconstruction. Not stone, not clay, but relevance. She's still here, not because we found her tomb, but because she lives in every conversation about beauty, power, sex, race, leadership, and the terrifying confidence of a woman who knew she didn't need anyone's permission to take the damn throne. She's still trending, still misquoted, still misrepresented, still misunderstood, and still unforgettable. That's her final masterpiece. Not a kingdom, not a war, not even a love story, but this. A version of herself so flexible, so seductive, so impossible to pin down that it survives in every century, in every format, in every mouth that dares to say her name. Cleopatra, not Queen of Egypt, Queen of narrative. You're in a costume shop now, not ancient Alexandria, not the deck of Cleopatra's barge or the echoing halls of her palace, but a warehouse in Los Angeles with golden mannequins and racks of velvet and satin. One of the tags reads Cleopatra Scene 3. The gown is green, impossibly tight, with a neckline so low it could start a war. Again. The headpiece weighs more than most people's dignity. a shimmering halo of metal snakes and faux jewels. It's not historically accurate, of course, but no one here is aiming for accuracy. They're aiming for impact. Because Cleopatra sells, she always has, she's a brand now. More enduring than Nike, more mysterious than Mona Lisa. A crown of contradiction, all at once soft and brutal, sacred and scandalous, overexposed yet still somehow unknown. And it makes you wonder, what is it about her? Not Nefertiti, not Hatshepsut, not Boudica or Zenobia, not even Joan of Arc gets this level of iconography. But Cleopatra, she gets perfume, she gets slot machines, she gets Halloween costumes. Here's your historical fact. Cleopatra's image has been commodified since before the Renaissance. Painters in the 15th century loved portraying her death. Always dramatic, often topless, surrounded by weeping handmaidens and suspiciously Roman architecture. In the 19th century, Victorian authors obsessed over her morality, casting her either as a sultry sinner or a woman tragically destroyed by passion. By the 20th century, she had become a full-on cultural juggernaut. She wasn't just remembered, she was recast. And here's your fringe fact. In the Antony film Cleopatra, the set and costume budget was so massive it nearly bankrupted 20th Century Fox. Elizabeth Taylor's Cleopatra had more outfit changes than most of us have days in a month. The film turned her into a kind of cinematic deity, bigger than life, richer than Rome, more desirable than anything ever put on screen. Audiences swooned, critics fumed, and the myth only deepened, because that's the trick. It doesn't matter what she looked like, it matters what she meant, and the meaning keeps changing. In the 60s, she was rebellion in eyeliner. In the 80s, she became a feminist revision. In the 2000s, a meme. Today, she's all of them at once. On one TikTok, she's a misunderstood political genius. On another, she's the original hot girl. One podcast calls her an icon of post-colonial resistance. Another says she invented ghosting. And the truth? They're all telling the story they need her to tell. Here's the scholarly debate that's quietly tearing classicists in half. Should Cleopatra be reclaimed as a symbol of empowerment, or should we be wary of putting modern values on ancient figures? Was she a feminist icon, or just a monarch doing what monarchs do? Is it dangerous to romanticize her? Or is it more dangerous to strip her of the agency she wielded so ferociously in her own time? And this, right here, is the heart of her legend. Because Cleopatra resists being flattened. You want to say she was the last pharaoh, but that title is complicated. You want to say she died for love, but maybe she died for legacy. You want to say she used sex as a weapon, but only if you're also willing to admit she used economics, military alliances, legal structures, religion, and language the same way. This isn't about giving her credit she doesn't deserve. It's about not taking away the credit she does. You stand in front of a mirror now, one of those full-length vanity ones rimmed with too many light bulbs. You see the costume, the black wig, the thick coal liner, the shimmering fabric, and you ask yourself, who is this woman we keep dressing up as? She's not here to correct us. She's not here to clarify. She let go of that right when she refused to leave behind a clean legacy, when she chose myth over memoir, when she saw the world was going to tell her story whether she liked it or not, and decided to rig the story from the inside out. Because seduction, remember, isn't just about attraction, it's about influence. It's about making people follow, even when they don't know why. And Cleopatra is still leading every time someone paints her, or tweets about her, or studies her, or wears her, or tries to explain her away. She wins, because while her male counterparts have been neatly boxed into textbooks, Julius the General, Antony the Lover, Octavian the Emperor, she remains open-ended, a choose-your-own-adventure, a Rorschach test in gold and silk. People ask, was Cleopatra real? And that question doesn't mean, did she exist? Of course she did. What it really means is, can someone like that be real? Can someone be powerful and passionate, deadly and kind, ruthless and loving, beautiful and strategic? Can a woman be all those things at once without it being a trick? The answer is Cleopatra, and Cleopatra is the answer. So you walk out of the costume shop, past the wigs, past the prop spears, past the racks of satin and plastic gold, and the city outside is buzzing like it always has. Cars, neon signs, too many people on their phones. But somewhere beneath the noise her presence hums, a frequency the world hasn't turned off yet. It's in the self-made woman who refuses to apologize. It's in the teenage girl filming herself in eyeliner, lip-syncing to power ballads. It's in the professor still debating whether Cleopatra was Greek or African or Arab or all of the above. It's in you, even now, retelling her story to yourself like a bedtime prayer with sequins. She doesn't need your approval. She has your attention. Still, always, you're back where it started now, Alexandria. The air is heavier here somehow, as if the city still hasn't quite exhaled all the stories she left behind. The sun is going down, same as it did the night Cleopatra wrapped herself in silk and vanished from history. You stand near the harbour wall, watching the light flicker over the water's surface, imagining her barge slipping away, not in retreat but in refusal. That's how she always moved, not fleeing, just stepping back into myth. And this is where we ask the impossible question, the one every biographer, playwright and screenwriter has asked since the moment she died. Was sex really her superpower? Was it the thing that got her everything? Or the thing we blame when we can't admit she was brilliant? Let's start with what we know. Here's your historical fact. Cleopatra ruled Egypt for 21 years. She stabilized its economy. She navigated an increasingly aggressive Rome. She maintained peace with neighboring kingdoms. She kept power through revolts, natural disasters, invasions, and internal betrayals. She ruled not just as a queen, but as a pharaoh, the first of her line to speak Egyptian fluently, to fully embrace the religious role of divine monarch. Her coinage bore her face alone. Her name was carved into temples beside gods. This was not a woman propped up by lovers. She was a ruler who used relationships, but did not need them to govern. Now here's your fringe fact. In ancient Egyptian tradition, female pharaohs weren't unheard of. Hatshepsut ruled successfully centuries before Cleopatra. But Cleopatra was different, because she didn't just hold the throne, she exported it. Her alliances with Caesar and Antony weren't just affairs, they were foreign policy strategies. They were acts of diplomacy, sexual, absolutely, but also deeply, shrewdly political. So was sex her superpower? Let's rephrase that. Was charisma her superpower? Was influence? Was the ability to walk into a room full of dangerous men, flash a smile, speak to them in their own language, and leave them wondering what just happened? Was that the secret? Because seduction isn't always about what happens in bed. Sometimes it's what happens in the pause between questions. Sometimes it's what happens when you convince your enemy that he'd rather be your ally. And here's the scholarly debate that never quite cools. Did Cleopatra lean on romantic alliances because she had no other options in a male-dominated world? Or did she choose them because she knew exactly how to extract power from desire? Some say she was trapped. Others say she trapped them. But you were there, or close enough to feel the heat, and you know this much. She was never passive. Not with Caesar, not with Antony, not with Rome. She made moves with purpose, and she knew when to lean closer, when to step back, when to whisper instead of shout. And maybe that's the point. It wasn't sex. It was control over the narrative of sex. She took the most weaponized tool in a patriarchal world, female sexuality, and wielded it like a pharaoh's crook. Not for pleasure, for power. And when that power cracked, she chose how it ended, before Rome could stage it, before Octavian could parade her in chains, before anyone could reshape her image. She finished it herself, because that's what she always did. She finished her stories before anyone else could. You walk through a marketplace that still sells anise and honey, and for a moment, the smell tricks you. It's like she's behind you, perfumed, watching, amused that anyone's still trying to figure her out. She was born in a time of chaos. She ruled in a time of collapse. She fought two of the most powerful empires in history, and almost won. And then she did what no Roman could do. She became immortal, not by war, by memory. So, back to the question. Was sex her superpower? Sure, along with language and vision and the ability to read a room faster than a general reads a battle map, along with style and timing, and knowing exactly when silence says more than a scream. She knew what the world expected of her and used it as disguise. She made her body a banner, her voice a sword, her intellect a fog. She made herself desirable not just to men, but to history itself. And that's the secret. Not that she seduced Caesar, but that she seduced time. She made herself unforgettable. She made herself interesting. Even now you're still leaning forward, still asking questions, still craving more. Not because she was perfect, but because she refused to disappear. In the end, her empire fell. Her children were scattered. Her tomb is lost. But her name, it's everywhere. In our mouths, in our mirrors, in every woman who refuses to apologize for power, for beauty, for ambition, for contradiction. So if you came here for secrets, maybe that's the biggest one. The real seduction wasn't in the bedroom. It was in the lasting curiosity. She made you care, and she made sure you'd never stop. So now, with the last light fading over Alexandria's harbour and the sea pulling secrets back into its tide, you can breathe again. You've made it through. Not just through the rise and fall of a queen, but through the layers, the silk and steel, the scandal and silence, the stories and counter-stories. You sat beside Cleopatra's throne. You floated on her barge. You heard her laugh, heard her command, saw the curve of her power sharpen like obsidian in the sun, and maybe now, at last, you understand. She wasn't trying to be a goddess. She wasn't trying to be a villain, or a martyr, or even a legend. She was trying to survive. To hold a kingdom in a world that punished women who ruled without asking. And she did more than survive. She shaped how history remembers desire, intelligence, and political ambition in the female form. She didn't play by the rules. She seduced them. Wrapped them in gold and smoke and made them dance to her rhythm until they forgot they had ever belonged to someone else. Now, when you say her name, Cleopatra, it doesn't just conjure eyeliner or asps, it conjures complexity, fire, strategy, a pulse, and maybe that's the truest seduction of all, the one that never ends. So go ahead, close your eyes, let the waves of the Nile fade into the background hum, let the torches burn low in the palace hall, let the scent of lotus and oil linger like memory. She's not gone, she never was, she's still with you, in every question you'll ask tomorrow, and every story you'll retell, softer, slower, a little closer to the truth.